The first order of business today, and I'd ask everyone to make sure you speak in the mics so they can, public can hear you and everyone else can hear you. We can hear each other. Item number 1, we're going to postpone till the next regular meeting. And at this time, I'd like to introduce Sylvia Saylor. She's a new administrative assistant on board. And I'm going to ask Mr. Kolash to introduce an item he'd like to have added to the agenda.
Mr. Chairman, I know we got a lot on our plate the way it is, but I'd like to add the Parks and Rec ordinance to item number 16.
Okay. Thank you. So at this time, we're going to start with our regular agenda, item 1. It's a final plat. It's to consider a rezone petition from agricultural AG to GC, LI, and GI for the property described in the southeast quarter of Section 16, Township 140 North, Range 96 West. And at this time, I'd ask the party presenting to give us an idea of what you'd like to do with this.
I'm Tracy Tews with Dickinson Energy Park. What we're requesting is, it was advertised wrong. It showed that there was no limited industrial in the advertisement. What we had did is we had met with some people of concern on the property, and we had changed the plot. The original plot showed that the general commercial was only going to be 300, we moved that to 400. The limited industrial was going to be 300. We also moved that to 400. And then we transitioned to general industrial. So if there's any further questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Anyone have any questions for Mr. Tews? Thank you, Mr. Tews. At this time, we will, Mr. Elkins.
I have one question. Tracy, frontage road along Highway 22, you've met with Al about this, right?
Al and I have had some discussion of a frontage road in there. During the plotting, we are proposing a frontage road. I don't know the width that Mr. Heiser would like to see there.
Okay.
An assumption would be 40 to 60 feet, somewhere in there. The frontage road cannot, his concern was he didn't want the frontage road to connect to 33rd.
And I agree. I
Okay,
agree.
so.
Any other questions?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
two questions. We talked at the last meeting that if this happens, we should view it as a transition from the obvious industrial zoning to the north and what is likely going to end up being mixed use to the south. If we go forward with this, to me that means we need to do something different along 33rd. If we have mixed use across the road to the south, which could be residential, I'm not sure we want to transition from industrial to something that could be residential or at least very light commercial across that road. Would you be open to a strip of commercial along the north side of 33rd?
Like a corridor strip?
Something like you're doing here, the 400 feet or whatever it might be.
I would not be in opposition to that. And I guess, just to further one comment, is to the west, there's a home to the west that I have not had any contact with that homeowner. I've stopped, and I know Mr. Jeff Lowe has stopped and tried to talk to that homeowner as well. At this stage, I haven't had any contact with them. And I'm sure that they're going to want some kind of a buffer.
Well, that would help that situation a little bit. You know, I'm more concerned about really doing a transition to something other than industrial as we go south. And I think if we don't do something along 33rd, we're not doing as good a job doing that.
I'd be open to, I don't know if I'd go beyond the corridor buffer, you know, 400's kind of deep, and general commercial's kind of limited.
Well, okay, that's just a thought, and I don't know how the rest of you feel about that, but that's something that I think we should look at. The other question I have, though, you know, you just brought up the frontage road. There are a couple of locations shown on this drawing, and this is not a plat, this is just a depiction of what you want for zoning. But you've shown a couple possible locations for roads, and I'm finding myself real uncomfortable that we're not seeing some kind of layout. I'm not saying a final plat, but some kind of layout as to lots, blocks, and streets before we rezone. What's going to happen here, I think you'd agree, this property is more marketable once it's rezoned. And if it starts being sold a tract at a time, we're going to get backed into some plat that really hasn't been thought out, that really hasn't been designed. I realize that means more expense for you to bring it to that stage. And again, I don't know what the rest of the board feels, but I just have a concern that we're not even seeing a true layout before we're doing this rezoning. With 160 acres, a significant piece of ground.
The only roadway that I could tell you that's for sure right now are the two roadways that we're showing, because the DOT access needs to be taken out from where it's at and moved to align with the one at Key Energy. And the 111th J Avenue is the one that connects to the industrial park to the north. And those are the concerns that the county has brought to me of pass-through.
And again, those may be your intentions, but I think you'd admit, if you had the right buyer tomorrow morning, that
I'd sell the whole 160.
you'd sell the whole thing, and now your intentions don't help us anymore. So, you know, I'm just, I find myself uncomfortable. I said last month, and I would say it again, that I think there's a place for some industrial here. I don't have a problem with that. I look at the street that you do have sketched in here, the east-west street, and there's going to be some drainage issues coming across that street. You're going to need some drainage easements. We're not going to know that till we go through a platting process, or at least to a preliminary plat. I don't know what the rest of the board thinks.
I would agree, Gene. I'd like to see more of a planning process done with this piece of property prior to us approving anything here. I think right now we're jumping ahead of ourselves. I don't understand the layout. I have concerns about the frontage, and Tracy has, I believe, addressed that with the county road superintendent and DOT. I have a concern with 33rd Street because coming out of this subdivision onto 22, that would have to be built up in front of 22 in order to accommodate truck traffic trying to move out onto 22. I don't know if you know that, Tracy. You've seen that there's kind of a dip there. You almost have to take a run for it. But I'd like to see these lots, I'd like to see lots, blocks, streets, and have just a general idea before we move forward with this.
Any other comments or questions for Mr. Tews? Does that sound all workable?
Yes, it does.
Okay. And I'm sure in the comprehensive plan, there's proposed usage for the property south of 33rd Street. And
Mr. Chairman, if you'd like to speak about the comprehensive plan, or at least where we're at, we haven't finalized the, I guess you can call it the interim future land use map. Based upon the public hearings that we've had and conversations with them, this would be consistent, generally consistent with the future land use map as of today. We are bringing that forward for discussion with the Planning Commission and also City Commission on the 22nd, in which you're all invited from 3 to 5 to discuss that and some strategy sessions as well. So this project as it is consistent with that. I understand your concerns with the road. You know, I personally feel that, you know, the places that I've been, I'm fine with rezoning the property and then coming back later and platting it with that to market it, to have the expectations, at least you have an entitlement. You know what the land uses are. They can go out and then he could market it, and then the developer comes in with their specific plan and they come in and plat that. If we do it the other way, as we traditionally been doing it, we have a lot of replats, and we're constantly dealing with replats where you have a development expectation of an existing lot in which you're saying, you know, I need to have more, so they're modifying property lines, putting in new additional roads and the rest. So, you know, I can understand both sides. It would be great to just say, you know, to say that you have to have your rezoning and plat all at the same time, and you have to have everything all locked up with your building plans, but that's not the realities of today's environment. So I'm comfortable with allowing the rezoning to go forward with that, and we'll take care of the platting side, dealing with the roads, the drainage, and all that, as we normally do with our platting process. But I understand your concerns as well. So that's an issue for ultimately all the commission members to decide which way you want to proceed.
I think that brings awareness level to, you know, to a point where it should be.
I would recommend, Mr. Chairman, that, you know, based upon Commissioner Jackson's comments, that if we were going to put a transition zone or a commercial zone along the north side of 33rd, that it probably should be, you know, 400 feet or between 200 and 400 feet deep. If it's any less than that, it's not really viable for commercial. You're just going to get strip developments. You need to have something to have a little bit of width to it in order for you to provide sufficient development for that. So that's up to you to decide which way to go. 400 seems reasonable if you wanted to put a strip along the north side of 33rd Street as a general commercial.
Thank you, Mr. Corton.
I agree with that as well. You know, as to the replat, that is an issue. That can be an issue, but, you know, I'm not suggesting we have to go to final plat before we do the zoning. But if we do a good preliminary plat, so we can get a feel for what the layout's going to be, we can be more accurate with our rezoning. Then we won't have the replat issue, you know, if we do it that way.
Is everyone fairly clear on that, you know, the implications of where the roads should be, and there should be roads, and they're going to have to comply with what we expect on 33rd or to the north going out of the property, accessing Highway 22 in a viable manner, and then the internal workings of how the different property owners would end up, their internal roads inside. There's a lot of possibilities, but we should have some idea, depending on who's going to buy what property and develop it in what manner if they do. Any other questions or comments at this time for Mr. Tews? At this time, this is under a public hearing, so at this time I'd ask if there's anyone here who would like to make comment on this, please feel free to come forward.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commission members. My name is Jeff Lowe, and I live in Krolichek subdivision. My property is within the 300 feet of this proposed rezoned property. I guess I'm representing a lot of people that signed the petition the first time this came around that can't be here today, and of course for myself, but I am still against the rezoning, mainly because of all the unknown land uses that can be given. You know, because you change it from agricultural to industrial and commercial, as you're saying. There's numerous things that can happen there, and We don't know what they are. For example, if you just go general commercial along Highway 22, you still can have a truck terminal, a transportation terminal, equipment repair center, a lot of things that could generate a lot of truck traffic, and open warehousing, things that were a residential R1 zoned residential subdivision right across the highway, so it affects us a lot. So that's our big concern. And a lot of the concerns are the traffic issue, there's going to be a lot more traffic, the noise. You guys have all heard Jake brakes from semis, and we're already being experienced to it by people turning west on 33rd now, but it would increase that a lot. And what would be the hours of operation of these businesses? Are they going to be 5 days a week? Are they going to be 24 hours a day, 7 days a week? That makes a big difference, because when you go to home and you want to sleep, if you're right next to some busy thing, it's not going to work so nice. I guess the other things would be just emissions. Semis do emit a lot more than a car and a pickup, and there are diesel fumes that drift, and we're on the predominant downwind side of that development. And the appearance, what are these properties going to look like? How will that affect our property values? Right across the road, it is a concern. What's it going to do to the value of our properties? We take pride in it, and a lot of those homes are all nice. The next thing I'd like to comment is what has taken place between Dickinson Energy Park, represented by the developer Tracy Tews, and Krolichek subdivision residents in the surrounding area, which is represented by George Nodland and myself. Tracy Tews did call a meeting on January 20th, and we met with him, and he did show us a preliminary sketch plot plan. It didn't have a lot of things in there, but some of the things we talked about was agreeing to put a 400-foot setback buffer zone, on the east side of the property. So that would go from Highway 22 back 400 feet, and there would not be any buildings in that buffer zone, but there would be a frontage road, as you already mentioned. The frontage road would be limited access, is what was discussed. It wouldn't tie into 33rd Street Southwest. It would go, north-south paralleling the highway. It would go to that new approach that he stated across from Key Energy. That was discussed. And I guess as far as getting on to 33rd, he just, said it would be a lot further to the west. It wouldn't be close to the highway. The agreement then that we had with Mr. Tews was he was going to develop a new plot plan. And once that plot plan was drawn up, he would notify George or myself and have copies available, and then we would distribute those copies to the people of Krolichek subdivision in the surrounding area, whoever's affected by this rezone. Give us ample time to look the preliminary plot plan over, and then, call a meeting. Tracy would call a meeting, and all of us that can attend will voice our concerns. And only after we had a chance to talk and come to an agreement was this supposed to be brought back up for rezoning. That was the understanding, okay? Well, the next thing I hear was on February 4th, I got a letter from the city of Dickinson, as Ed Corton sends out, for telling me that this property is up for rezoning again. So I was surprised because I had no contact from the developer. So, what's going on here? Well, then on February 9th, 5 days later, after the notice from the city, Tracy Tews did contact me and said he had a rezoning map, and I believe you guys have that map. Well, we looked at the map, and I distributed it to people in Krolichek, and they said, well, this is not a plot plan. This is a zoning. It's basically what we got from the city of Dickinson. It tells us it's those three zones. It does not tell us where there's a 400-foot buffer zone, that there's going to be a limited access frontage road. It doesn't have any of those things on there. So you can see our concern. It doesn't show any of the things we talked about and agreed would be in there. So I guess basically we have no new plot plan. no meeting with the people, no agreement, So that's where it's at. And the last thing I was going to comment, and I guess you've already brought that up, on the December 21st meeting, I thought one of the main reasons for tabling the issue was to wait for the comprehensive land use plan, and you've already discussed that, so that was just something I was wondering about. But that's all I had, unless you had any questions. of
No
me.
questions at this time. Thank you, Mr. Hall.
Thank you for your time.
At this time, I'd ask if there's anyone else who'd like to make comment on this rezone, please feel free to come forward.
Good morning. My name's Sharon King. I was here at the meeting in December when what Jeff was saying, as far as the commission asked at the time, as we were leaving, that people contact us and kind of reassure us that what might be going on there with our questions is, different things that we had brought up and we stepped out of the room and wrote down our email addresses and were said that, we'd be contacted. As far as I know, I watched it every day. I've never been contacted. Yes, they met with Jeff and George, but I wasn't contacted. And there was a big list. So it didn't seem to be fulfilled what had been asked to be done. And I'd just like to be part of it a little bit more than just coming to a meeting.
Thank you, Ms. King. This time I ask if there's anyone else who'd like to make comment, please feel free to come forward.
Hello, good morning. My name is Dave Logus, and I live in Krolichik subdivision, and I've lived there for 28 years. And what concerns me is the fact that I haven't been contacted other than by Jeff, and the main thing is that 400-foot buffer zone, and the people living in this subdivision are losing their peace and tranquility. We're going to get a lot of diesel fumes, which we already do from the north, and there's about 40 acres in the middle of that zone that they want redistricted or rezoned right now that's full of pheasants and wildlife, and they're certainly going to lose their home too. But I'd like to see a little bit more input from Mr. Tooze here with a more accurate map. Exactly where is the buffer zone going to be? Because if you just zone it the way he's got it proposed on this map, once it's zoned, we have no recourse as to what's going to happen there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Logos.
Good morning, Commissioners. I too was at the last meeting.
And your name, sir?
My name is Kevin Schmidt, and I'm also a resident in the Krolichik subdivision. My concerns are, what's been already stated, essentially, and also a question, I guess, why this particular property couldn't be looked at from a standpoint of a residential, similar to what we have in the division, versus, a lot of the direction has been towards other uses right now. We'd like to, I think a number of us in that division would like to see that being entertained as well. And the comments that Mr. Jackson made this morning, very pertinent to our concerns there. I would also concur with the information that Jeff brought to this meeting earlier. One other thing, George, when he was up here at the last meeting, had a number of concerns. I'm sure they're a matter of record. I don't think any of those concerns, or at least I haven't heard of them being addressed this time around. So I think water issue was a big one, and would like to explore that a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schmidt. This time, if there's anyone else who would like to make comment, please feel free to come forward.
Good morning. My name is Alan Cody, and I live on 33rd Street, approximately a 16th of a mile away from where this proposed rezoning is. And I'm against the rezoning because I've lived there 22 years now, and I enjoy living in the country where it's quiet. And if this gets rezoned, there'll be all kinds of traffic and people and buildings going up. And also, my neighbor next to me, he lives right next to this proposed rezoning, and he says if this gets rezoned, he's going to sell. And then I have another concern that then his property will probably be rezoned to commercial, and I'll have it right up to my property. And so that's my concern, I guess. I enjoy the country living, and I'd like to keep it that way. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to make comment? Please feel free to come forward. Anyone else who would like to make comment on this proposed zoning change, please feel free to come forward. Anyone on the commission wish to make comment at this time?
Mr. President,
Yes, Mr. Colling.
prior to the vote, I'd just like to note for the record, Mr. Tews and Mr. Nodland have indicated a conflict of interest with this matter. State law requires that when a commission member, excuse me, when a commission member has a direct or substantial personal pecuniary interest in the matter, they are obligated to declare that interest and abstain from voting on the matter. Prior to the meeting, both Mr. Tews and Mr. Nodland had indicated to me that they did have this conflict and would be abstaining from this matter.
Thank you, Mr. Colling. And thank you, Mr. Nodland. Mr. Tews?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Elkins.
if I might, I'd like to table the request of rezoning from Ag to GC, LI, and GI for the property described in the southeast quarter of Section 16, Township 140-96, for the reasons of just a better idea as to what's going to happen here. Streets, some of that, I'd like to have a better idea. Just the transition into, from industrial into general commercial, and our comp plan.
Can we just say pending completion of a preliminary plat? Could that be part of the motion?
Yeah.
Because that would do all
I don't
those
have a
things.
problem with that, yes.
That'd be acceptable to you, Mr. Elkins, and that leaves it
Yes.
open then for time-wise.
Yes.
I'll second.
There's been a motion to table action on this, pending completion of a preliminary plat by Mr. Elkins, and a second by Mr. Jackson. Any discussion?
Just a comment, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Krieg.
You know, there's a lot of people opposed to this, and that's a pretty prime piece of land, and I mean, I'm in favor of something happening there. I'm just, I'm in agreement with holding off to get a preliminary plat, but I think, like I said, that's a pretty nice piece of land that things can happen on, and I'm not opposed to something happening, and I don't think any of us are. We just want a better idea of what's going on. So.
I too agree with you, Mr. Krieg, that it is a prime piece of property, and something will happen on that property, more than likely, and that it should be done right. It is along a major highway. Highway's been there for a long time, and that highway, I believe we've got affirmation from the state that will be 4-lane to the county line. Mr. Corton, you comment on that?
5 lanes.
5 lanes.
Yeah, 4 lanes
Okay.
with the turning lane, I believe, is the latest proposal for that, so yes.
And
There will be a significant increase in traffic as a result of it, you know, irrespective of this development.
right. And also, we have gotten initial implication from the state that there's going to be some fairly nice dressings along that highway, as far as greenery and shrubs, and it's going to be a fairly nice looking thoroughfare. I don't believe the traffic is going to reduce in any way, shape, or form for years.
Mr. Chairman, that's really,
Mr. Elk,
that's really
Mr. Jackson.
a good point that the folks in Kralicheks maybe don't know, that the DOT will be doing tree plantings
Right,
along that highway. It, you know, not a big thing, but it all helps.
sure. Any other discussion? Being none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. This time, we'll continue on our regular agenda, and this is the, we're following the pink sheet today, the revised agenda. It's a rezoning request. Thanks, George.
We can't let it.
Yeah. I'd like the copy.
I can't hear.
Hold it.
I don't care about that.
I would like that back.
Thanks, Tracy. You did good. Yep. I think
Maybe our
the
mic
smallest
is-
commercial buffer is possible. Yeah. 200 or 150? Okay. Really? This time, we have item 2 on it's a rezoning request. It's to consider a rezone petition from agricultural to general industrial for property described in the northeast quarter of Section 21, Township 139 North, Range 96 West. Closure number 2. At this time, I'd ask the party presenting, please come forward.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commission. I'm Joe Rosschuller, President of Steffes Corporation. We would refer to that top property on the south side of town near our manufacturing plant as our oil tank yard. So we have been manufacturing, of course, here in Dickinson for 50, 60 years. And I've joined the company 24 years ago as the 15th employee. Today, we're happy to say we've got 210. We'll continue to grow if we, of course, we can get staff. Part of the exciting part of what's going on here in growth is oil. And 6 years ago, we didn't make an oil tank. Today, we're putting out a significant amount of business in our south plant, and hence, we're able to rent that property for the last 6 years. In the last 60 days, we were able to sign a purchase agreement on that land, and therefore said we better go in and get some zoning correction to get it general industrial from AG. So that is our request today. We understand that, you know, it's on the corner of Highway 22. There's also a 16-inch gas pipeline underneath that property. We also have tried to keep the dust down. We've done some graveling and things. Our hope is to do even more on top of that. But we need the tank yard and for us to build. You can drive by and go, wow, there's a lot of tanks out there. We have 12.5 acres there that we're asking for rezoning. The inventory you see out there is about a 2-week supply. So we turn it quickly, but to be in compliance, we need general industrial in that area. We don't have any plans to put a building on that today, but we do not want to have our hands tied either. If sometime down the road, we would need to put a facility on there. A couple other things that we've done in the last year to look at we're kind of landlocked down there, and you know, we've bought half of the property to the south of us, which is the church furniture building. We bought the metal building there and halfway of the road between there, and also purchased another 30 feet on the north side of their lot to extend our yard. And we also know we have 3 homes down there that are by us that came in the last 45 years, and we own one of those 3. So as we look at that plot down there, we are asking for a rezoning request to general industrial.
Now, I want a correction on that, or clarification, Mr. Rosschuller. You want to go to general commercial or general industrial? What do we have on that? I'd like,
I'll explain this, Mr. Chairman. I had spoken to, I think Greg is your your manager or whatever, the corporation a while back, when it originally came to me, probably about 2 months ago. I told them the city's perspective on it, that we're in the process of adopting our corridor overlay ordinance, and that, general industrial would not be befitting for that. I suggested that they go further to the west in order to provide industrial for the property. They submitted their application. They originally submitted as GC, but it was advertised as general industrial. And then you'll notice on the application, and I spoke to Greg on the 24th, and it went to GC because I told him as staff's perspective, we would only be in favor of general commercial or commercial designation, similar to our corridor overlay district, similar to what we've done on the prior petition that was continued. And then they still wanted to go with the general industrial. So we revised our letters to everybody and made sure that it was general industrial. So the property owners have been advertised that it's general industrial. Their desire is general industrial. It was advertised general industrial. That's just the application shows it is GC. So hopefully that clears that up for you, Mr. Chairman.
It does. It just adds another question, is if, does the general industrial fit in with our corridor overlay?
Not with what we're proposing. I mean, the corridor overlay is, we're talking about land uses, not necessarily zoning designations. But what we've been doing up north is I think we should be consistent in the south side as well. Over the last 6 months, we've been telling anybody that's along Highway 22, you need to have at least a commercial designation for 400 feet or so, 300 to 400 feet. I think we need to be consistent and continue that as well. I understand stuff has been there for a while. It's an aesthetic issue. It's one that we've been consistent with, and as staff, I would recommend denial of this application.
Thank you, Mr. Corton.
Mr. Corton, could we make a request to the applicant that he changes that zoning to general commercial for the first couple hundred feet and then transitions into an LI into a GI?
They could propose to do that. If they want to move it further to the west, I think that would be fine, But the problem is, I think they want to keep it on the existing pad that you have. The current pad that they have, and that current pad abuts up next to the Highway 22 right-of-way. So it's an issue of, do you think this is an appropriate land use? The city allowed them, I think about this prior to my time, allowed them to have a couple of the tanks there. Over the last year, that has proliferated to a point in which they have numerous tanks on the site without an entitlement, without any official permission. And that's what they're trying to do today is in essence, get vested in or to have the right use for it. A general commercial designation does not work with what they are proposing with the tanks. That's an industrial classification. So it's an issue of, do you look at the land use or do you look at what has been there for about a year now and decide if you want to accommodate that. That's up to you today. I think based upon our corridor plan and the rest, and what we have been telling people to the north, to be consistent, I think we need to follow through as well in the south. It's a gateway just as much as the north is.
And may I address part of that?
Oh, go ahead, Mr. Rochler.
We certainly understand where the commission is trying to come from, and when you're going north and it's open land and people are wanting to come in on development, we've been there much longer than a year. We've been there 6 years. We've been fully utilizing that land, and when we negotiated the purchase with the landowner, we chose to go in the staying more parallel to Highway 22 to stay away from the homes that are on 20th. Even though there's 3 beside us, we understand there's other developments and things going on and not taking our tank yard to the west. So we chose to negotiate with them to go to the south, not knowing your request for GC, but GC doesn't fit us. It doesn't fit a tank yard, it doesn't fit an industrial plant. And again, we've been on that south end a long time. I realize this is a tough situation. Steff's organization has been here a long time. It isn't a matter of picking up that plant and putting it somewhere else. If we could staff a plant, guys, we would build a 60,000 square foot plant on the north side of town by our land, but we can't staff additional people. So putting that investment in the community, it doesn't make any sense to us. We need to accommodate our plant, the infrastructure that we've got on the south side of town today.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Rochler at this time? you, Mr. Rothschiller. This time I'd ask if there's anyone else who would like to make comment on this rezoning request, please feel free to come forward.
I'm Diane Melby, and I represent the owners of the property in the west half of 21, the Langowskis. Our concern is just to be of record that that's still agricultural land. I understand from being at the city and looking at the map that that may be rezoned differently in the future, but we just want to be of record that the west half of 21 is still agricultural land.
Thank you, Ms. Melby. Is there anyone else who would like to make comment on this rezone application? Please feel free to come forward.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. My name's Galen Baker. I'm a Stark County resident. I'm also employed by Stark Development Corporation. I drive by this site 2 to 5 times every day because I live south of town. I also, as a development corporation, we've done a lot of business with Steffes Corporation over the years. We've helped them to grow and expand, I hope. And they are indeed one of our rock-solid manufacturing employers who helped us to make this town what it is today. On this particular piece of property, it does have some unique characteristics. It does have that big gas line underneath it, absolutely. It, and that does affect its future. The use right across the road, of course, is the MDU pumping station, which is, of course, could be, I'm sure, is classified as industrial. There's frontage access in place there. It just seems like that is very, if you go south of town there, I know that you're talking about a corridor plan. If there's ever a place that you would call it mixed-use area, that's it, because you've got auto body shops, you've got weld shops, you've got ag chemical dealerships, you've got a number of different uses that are mixed in with some houses, certainly. And, I think those people that live down there kind of accept that they're in a mixed-use environment. Granted, change is always hard for everybody, but, I just think that this is not an unreasonable request. And, I don't know the exact zoning that you want to put on there, but it does seem that, a lot of the elements are in place to make this a successful little industrial location. And I can't help but notice, with the corridor plan of putting commercial all along all of our corridors, being in the economic development business, I can tell you that we're never going to have enough commercial projects to fill in all that space. That those are going to sit empty to a large degree along those corridors for many, many, many years. It'll be years and years before we have enough commercial projects to fill those in. You just look at the pace of what happens. I mean, if I were putting up a repair shop of some kind, I would certainly, not go in that general commercial zone right next to the highway. I would go back to the light industrial, for example, on Mr. Tew's plat, because that would give me so many more options for other uses on that property. It'd give me so much more marketability of the property. I really think that what we're going to have is a lot of hayland along our corridors if we put too much of that corridor overlay in. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. If there's anyone else who would like to make comment on this rezone petition, please feel free to come forward.
I'll just be real brief. I just want to thank you for addressing this, and I just want to talk in terms of I'm old enough to remember 1957 when my father and I drove out there to buy the first piece of property. In addition to the 16-inch gas line, where we couldn't level the land, you actually have to leave the crown because the gas line, goes up. We have to leave the little hill in there. It certainly seems, logical that, the gas line, that's there. And the other piece that's unique to the property, it is kind of a swampland. You don't see it, but in the spring, certainly that, floods a portion of it. And if you raise it too high, then there is a water problem with it. So it is fitting that, a tank yard be a proper, application for that property. So I'll certainly respect whatever you decide, but certainly hope you can, vote in our favor.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. I'd like to ask if there's anyone else who would like to make comment.
Morning, I'm Warren Stang, homeowner in the area. I'm not against this. I would just like a few things done, I guess. The blowing dust and dirt is a huge problem down there. And I'd like to see that taken care of. Watering, putting up a fence, I guess, a 6-foot fence, with some silt fence inside there. They've already done work down there. I don't know if people know that or not. They have purchased the land and they have already leveled the land. Did they have permits for that through the county, through the city? I don't know. The road where we live on, 20th Street Southwest, is restricted, a 5-ton road. How are they getting in and out of there legally? It's poor access, poor visibility, coming up to the stop sign at Highway 22. And if they do continue with this, I'd like to see a 400-foot buffer as well. Trees installed. And another question, if Steffes gets this in their favor, do they get another $100,000 tax exemption?
We don't deal with that, Mr. Stang, so.
Just wondering. And the piece of equipment that they use to move tanks is on public roads all the time. They use the frontage road and 20th Street Southwest. Is that legal? And, correct lighting of the equipment and stuff. So that's my concerns.
Thank you, Mr. Stang. Somebody ask if there's anyone else who would like to make comment on this rezone application. Please feel free to come forward.
Hello, I'm Brad Cordnoy. I live east of the proposed land. Only thing I'm concerned is truck traffic. It would look like a frontage road on their side to help that truck traffic always coming out that intersection on 20th Street Southwest. It's dangerous the way it is because the speed limit starts from 55 to 65 right in front of my house. And there's people always trying to pass you already the way it is. So if there's going to be people turning off, it's just a hazard. I agree with the 400-foot proposed. I guess that's all I really have.
Thank you, Mr. Cordnoy.
Thank you.
Anyone else who would like to make comment, please feel free to come forward. Mr. Rothschild.
Yes, thank you. I'd just like to address Mr. Stang's comment. I think he has a very legitimate concern with dust. I assure you that we have been in lots of communication with those neighbors right next to us. They're living next to an industrial plant. We made a mistake in the last year in that the guys, for fire reasons, wanted to go out and kill the vegetation. They should not have. We created a dust bowl. We tried watering. It didn't work. We hired water trucks to come in. It helped. And they knew all along that once we had the opportunity to purchase that land, we would take care of that. And hence, we've gone in, we've leveled, we've spent $150,000 on gravel and scoria. It's not finished. That's going to get us through till spring, where we plan to go in and get rock in, where we're not going to get the dust and everything blowing. But he did indeed have a legitimate concern. But I think, in fact, one of the neighbors even turned us into the State Health Department. Had a nice conversation with the State Health Department on the things that we were doing. We were ready to bring trees in along 20th. until the time that we are able to buy the land, because at that time we didn't own it, or didn't have an agreement on it, and so we waited on the trees so we could do all the leveling. We're not opposed to putting some trees even along Highway 22, but it's an industrial site. We got to get in and out with the big semis, there's no doubt. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rothschiller. Okay.
I'll just make
I'm
one-
sorry, you didn't introduce yourself last time. This is Paul Steffes.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm Paul Steffes. I'll just make one quick comment on the truck traffic. It just happens that, yes, there's a lot of tanks there, but we only put out, 4 trucks a day. We can only load 4 trucks a day, and that's the number of tanks that we can make. So it isn't like thousands of trucks. We are talking about loading 4 trucks a day on average, so that there might be some days to be more, but some days less. But on average, we can't make more than 4 truckloads of tanks a day.
Thank you, Mr. Steffes. Anyone else like to make comment on this? Please feel free to come forward. Anyone on the commission wish to make comment while we have public hearings open? I'd like to say that, yes, it is not yet an industrial site, even though it is. And that I think that it would be appropriate to support the comprehensive plan, that the possibility of them doing work there may come under special use of some type, where certain restrictions are placed upon them. Something that would entertain what the comprehensive plan would support and still maybe let them function or not. But I think those thoughts should be entertained.
Mr. Chairman, with respect to your question, the petition request is for GI. It's either a straight permitted, it's a permitted by right or not. There's not a special use permit for that. So.
And that's my thinking, that this should be come back differently.
Excuse me, can you say that again? I'm not understanding.
GI, this would be a permitted by right or permitted use. So there would not be a special use permit requirement per our code. So you would either have to approve it with the expectation that they can do any of the uses in the GI zone, which is our most intensive zone. So it can go from this and it can become more intensive because that's our most intensive zoning district. Or you could propose them to come back if you want to feel comfortable. You can't have conditions placed on a rezone. And I want you to be aware of this.
Yes. That was not, my implication was this would come back totally different under another application. And at that time, maybe go for a lesser use with a special use on it afterwards, so it could be controlled, and they might be able to still function. Like, can you use an LI to store tanks? Do you know, Mr. Coley?
I defer to Mr. Corton on the precise regulations on the LI district. I don't believe that outdoor storage of tanks is allowed in an LI. I believe that requires a GI, though.
Mr. Chairman, well,
Mr. Jack.
Cortana is looking
Sure.
here. We're working hard to keep our gateways looking reasonable. If you look at other communities, as we all try to manage our way through this oil growth, this oil development, there's only so much we can do, and I think we've tried to set a precedent that we're going to try to keep these corridors something less industrial than other communities perhaps have. That's our intent here. Now we're faced with a company and individuals that we all have great respect for, and a request that's, addresses a use that's been going on for a few years already, so it's a difficult thing. The other thing we have to remember is that if we rezone to GI, property could be sold in the future. Steffes themselves may have a different use. We may not always be building tanks, and we're going to have a GI zoned parcel of land. That's problematic, potentially. What I was hoping we could do is to, whether we can do it today or next month, is to rezone this GC, which, by the way, we have to remember is pretty heavy in nature by our code. GC is still pretty heavy. Not heavy enough for the tanks, but it's still pretty heavy, that we could rezone it GC and do a special use permit. No?
Based upon the code, this particular use, even in an LI, would not, special use permit would not be an option for that. So it's a GI zone to have that particular one. A suggestion for you might be is that the applicant come back with a binding development agreement that maybe the city consider as the land use, and that's an option that I know I'm putting Attorney Colling on there, come with the development agreement saying specifically coming with the development plan, and the city accept that, and then we come back with potentially the rezoning after that effect, so that everybody's comfortable with it. That's the only way that I could see it. So it's either you allow it by right, or that's the only other option that I see, unfortunately.
Mr. Colling, is that something you have to think about?
Well, Mr. President, Commissioners, I would concur with Mr. Corton that a special use permit is not going to be applicable in this situation. By our code, industrial uses don't have special permit or special use permit provisions attached to them. You either rezone the property industrial or you zone it to something else. As far as a development agreement, we may be looking at something similar to a planned unit development or something like that. Mr. Corton and I could get together and discuss some of the details on that. That is a possibility that we could discuss.
I guess, Mr. Chairman, I guess what my thought is that we give Steffes some time to look at this issue and see if there are alternatives to black or white that we're looking at today.
I totally agree, because the greatest fear is that it get rezoned to GI, and for whatever reason, and anyone can do it, I mean, we can't predict the future, they could sell that, and it's going to be a GI from here on out, and that is something I don't think we want there.
Mr. Chairman, I could just add to it. As I've told you in the past, I'm very much a proponent of PUDs that allows you as a commission and ultimately the adopting commission as well to put pertinent conditions to it. And I think that's where everybody's going today. I'd be much in favor of doing a PUD for the property in which they would submit a detailed site plan. It would show everything. It'd be a negotiated plan in which then you would either approve it or deny it based upon how far they are willing to improve the site to make this work. I think the site could work with significant increasing of landscaping, maybe poplar trees initially with another row of them so you don't see it from the road, increasing the site itself, getting rid of the dust, and sufficient screening could potentially work for that. But that's going to be an increase of what they're going to have to do to the site. If you want to move that way, that's a way that potentially this could work. If you want to recommend it'll be a PUD, continue it and see if the applicant wants to proceed forward with that.
Thank you, Mr. Corton.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Nodland.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, listening to both sides here, and this is a typical and a peculiar, to me, both. But I think what we really have to remember, I think we need to try to fit this in for Steffes Manufacturing. And the thing we have to remember, this is a company that Mr. Jackson said that's been here for many years. They're a stable company. They've been a force in this community, and we have to remember that. But it doesn't allow them to break the law or go or work around the code. But we also need to remember they've been using this area for the last 6 years, according to Mr. Rushfelder, and because they were apparently allowed to do this before. But I think we need to find a way to make this fit and also make it fit the best that we can with the neighbors that have had to live with that. And I think this is, to me, it's a peculiar situation, but we have that. But again, they've been there. They've been using this land for that use. They've had some issues with the neighbors, but they're working, apparently trying to work with the neighbors. And I think we need to give it another month and see if they can come up with something with Mr. Coling and Mr. Corton and come up with something that would work for the best of everybody. It won't be 100%, but I think it'll be the best for everybody. We don't want them to leave the community, and they aren't going to leave the community, but we need to work with them too. Thank you.
Any other comments? I've just one question before, that's the direction I'd like to see it go to a PUD, but have we got a PUDs across any zoning at all? It doesn't matter.
PUDs could be across any zone. It's it's an overlay zone, and it's a negotiated zone with land uses and so forth. That's why I feel comfortable with it, because you're allowed to condition it appropriately if you're able to find that balance between a project. You can negotiate setbacks, add additional buffering, landscaping, land uses, and the rest. It makes a lot of sense to do it that way instead of your traditional zoning, in which if you meet the requirements, you get a building permit. So,
thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes,
I think we're all saying the same thing, and I'm really satisfied just letting Steffes work this out with staff and come back with another proposal. The one thing that I would like to see, though, is some time limit on it. I don't think it should be perpetual. I think there should be a time limit on it. So, the motion, when we're ready, that I would make is simply to table it and leave it at that.
Mr. Stein.
Just one thing, what's a PUD? Can you describe that, please?
Okay, it's when you take a piece of property, and we've done them with just, I think, mainly residentials. And you take that and you develop that unit in a peculiar way, and most of them is the property owners themselves will manage the internal workings of that. Most of them are where they will manage the streets, everything inside that unit. A lot of times someone will come in with a 20, 30 acre piece of property and they want to develop a gated community. And that's the most common thing throughout the United States. And inside that community, they take care of everything inside there. They decide how wide the roads are going to be, what kind of plants. And they do come under restrictions from the city, and oftentimes they have a lot of internal covenants attached to the properties of what can be done and can't be done inside that PUD. So it's a property development that's allowed to be done with the insight of the developer coinciding with the wishes of the city or the governance they're under. Mr. Rothschiller, did you want to make a comment?
I actually have a question, yeah. A question for you is the concern with GI because it's on 22? If that property was 200 feet to the west and we didn't own the first 200 feet, would that be an issue? 400 feet has been the number today. Yeah, the big issue is GI. I mean, your intentions may be, well, you're just the best in the world. But once that gets rezoned to GI, you could turn around and sell it tomorrow. Sure.
And whatever is allowed in GI can be done there.
Right. Understood.
And
your
it
concern
doesn't matter what your intentions are.
Your concern is the first 400 feet on Highway 22.
Oh, is it 300 on the corridor now? I mean, we've moved to 400 earlier today.
We had it initially, I think it was 330, and I think it's been 400. It's up to you to determine, whatever you feel is appropriate for it. The idea behind it is that, it's not saying that it has to be commercial. All we're saying is that we're trying to prohibit industrial developments along our major corridor. I think you would agree that they're not the most aesthetically pleasing land uses. So we're trying to, instead of allowing industrial, as we've done in the past, all along our major corridors, and reducing property values and obviously having a visual appearance, a negative visual appearance when you come into a community, have an industrial use off. An industrial use is not a retail use. No one drives down the street and goes, oh yeah, I need to pick up some pipe today, and pulls right in. It needs to be, it should be off our major corridors. So that's all we've been trying to do. That doesn't mean that it's going to be a commercial use. that property could be another use somewhere in the future. We're just trying to prevent industrial uses too close to our major corridor roads.
Obviously, Joe, the number is very arbitrary. Very
Yeah.
arbitrary. We started this about a year and a half or two ago with the North Industries Park where Baker Hughes is, where we required a strip that was commercial and not industrial. And maybe it would have happened without us doing it, but, you know, we have a nice office complex facing the road now.
Sure.
Rather than the back of the yard. And that's what we're trying to do.
And we support that.
Sure.
We agree with you, whether it's a crew camp or whether industrial. I understand Mr. Corton's comments. We have an investment that's been sitting there for 50 years that we're just not going to uproot and go somewhere else. We need to accommodate, we're trying to accommodate that. So if the concern is on Highway 22 and I can go further west and we can make that work, you know, if that's the concern, or if I'm going to come back for GI and I am 400 feet to the west or a quarter mile to the west and you turn me down again, what am I need GI, that's what I need. So I'm willing to work, we're willing to work with you to find a
Mr.
solution
Russell,
here.
I think that what you will come back with a PUD, I think that that's probably the most workable thing for that property.
Okay.
You know,
And I don't know
really,
what that is, but
and I
it's a good
think
question.
you'll see that that probably could be very workable if, working with the city and Mr. Croton and Mr. Colling, that agreement probably could be arranged. I mean, that's, I think, the best next step.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Kovash?
Just a question. If it ends up going that route, a PUD, I think the question's probably been answered, but maybe, you know, the homeowners need to know. Let's say 2 years from now, they sell the property. Does that revert back to an egg?
We would hope that Mr. Colling would make sure that's written in there.
Oh, Mr. Corton and I will have to detail out the provisions of the PUD, but it's virtually unlimited in the amount and the type of conditions that you can place upon a PUD. So if that is something that the commission is interested in making sure that this is specific to Steffes and would revert back to an agricultural use, that is something that can be incorporated into a PUD.
And, Mr. Chairman, with respect to the question, what I've traditionally done in the past would be, when you have your PUD, you have a site plan that's approved, and that's part of it. And what's shown on the site plan needs to be depicted and needs to be built. I don't have a problem with transferring ownerships, it's just the use would be for a storage yard depicted as, you know, industrial storage for these tanks. If they wanted to change that use, they'd have to come back through the board and modify it, just like you would for a new use. Then you have the assurance that what that use is going to be that use for X period of time. If you want to have a sunset clause to that is fine, but, you know, as far as I'm concerned, I think if you can make that work, and I think we can make it work with sufficient buffering and the rest, then you could allow that use to stay in perpetuity. But if there's a major modification to that, the use wants to be more intensive, then at that point, they have to come back through the whole process, Planning Commission, City Commission, to have that amended. And there's your assurance issue there.
Does that answer your question, Mr. Kovash? Any other comments?
Just one comment.
Mr. Pig?
You know, recently we tried to utilize that road to access a well site, and I guess I'm just wondering with the county now, if you know, the 626 feet, it looks like on this plat, that how far back do we go with access as far as utilizing that road? Because like someone said, it's 5 ton. I'm not sure if it's 5 ton, but I know Fisher is not allowed to utilize that road for hauling gravel. So I know it's just a small portion of that road, but is that an issue with the county, and have they been addressed as we move further west from Highway 22?
You know, those are issues that need to be, you know, taken up. We have policy, there's no doubt about it. I can't repeat the exact footage, and those are things that need to be checked out within the courthouse. We have a policy in place. And footage that they're placed off of 20th Street, it's not correct right now. I do know that. They need to set back a little further than what they are, yes. You know, and especially with the development that's proposed down in that area, we're going to have to look at setbacks more so because these streets down in that area are not conducive to the kind of traffic that I foresee happening down there.
You ready for a motion?
Okay, any other comments? Okay, this time we'll close public hearing. Mr. Jackson?
I'll move we table the rezoning request, agenda item 2 in Northeast Quarter, Section 21.
I'll second that.
A motion by Mr. Jackson, the table has been a second by Mr. Elkins. Any discussion? Not, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? Motion carried. This time, with all due respect to those people needing a break, we'll take a 5-minute recess.
Oh, we got 2 out of 16 done. No,
You know what I mean? How can you remember that? But they do need to check. They let the cart out of the farm before
I
the
don't think
horse.
so. They're bigger projects, but I think they're more black and white, to me.
Both went to the Oreo fundraiser last night. Oh, yeah?
The agenda changes, I pushed that too. Well, okay, we just might have a continuance of this meeting. Okay.
Just read it, Will. What is it? 8:30.
Okay, Mr. Big, ready?
45 minutes per item.
Okay. This time, we have item 3 on the rezoning request. On item 3 is to consider a rezone petition from R2 to R3 for property described in the Country Oaks Estates Second Edition. It's lots 1 through 21, Block 4. This time, I'd ask the party presenting, please come forward.
Hello, my name's Austin Sullivan with Sullivan Construction, and what I'm here today is just to present you with a preliminary plat drawing of how the R3 property would be used as per the instructions of the commission. And I'm open to answer any questions if you have any.
Anyone have any questions for Mr. Sullivan?
I would have one, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Mr. Jackson.
And you know, it's digressing. I suspect we'll probably approve this request today, but I see on your sketch that you're proposing apartments and no garages or anything. Is that right?
That's correct. It would all be on-site parking with no garages.
You know, I don't think we can force you to build garages, but I know that I think most of us would like to see a project that has that part of quality in it.
Okay.
And you know, I'm not suggesting we make that contingent on the rezoning request or anything like that. It's a request that you take a look at that and look at your project as a whole. I don't know, Mr. Curtin, if you have any comments on that.
Mr. Jackson, with respect to that, I would concur. I would think that, you know, on the short-term basis, yes, you can get by without having garages, but you want to look at your investment over the lifespan, you know, over a 20, 30, 40-year lifespan. And in about 5 years, 5 to 7 years, we may be in our peak during this time, and then after that, you're going to have to start competing with renters. And if you don't have garages, then you're not going to be able to command the rents that you would probably prefer in the future. So your revenue stream will probably be significantly reduced if you don't have garages. So I would strongly recommend that you do that. newer developments that are being proposed, that will be later today, and also ones that are around here, with garages, you're going to command a higher rent rate. It only makes sense in North Dakota. So I'd strongly suggest that as well.
Any other questions for Mr. Sullivan? Any comments? Mr. Elkins?
Do we have any idea as to how many R3 residential type, inventory is what I'm looking at?
Inventory
Are
of...
we going to overbuild? My concern is, are we going to overbuild on the R3 side?
It's a very good question, and I've been asking that recently of some of the apartment developers that are coming in from the area. I tell them, are you aware of, how many apartments we do have? When you factor in our projected population, we're in the process of doing that with North Dakota State, Extension's doing it, with where we could provide, infrastructure to accommodate a portion of that demand. I think that we're okay for the initial time. Last year, we technically had, I think it was roughly 200 multifamily dwelling units. That would be duplexes and above. The question remains, with our market that we have now, do we need more? Yes, but where is that horizon at? I don't know, and I think it's probably worthwhile to do a study. I guess the question would be, that'd be another one that you'd thrust on me, Jay, and I appreciate that, but it's probably warranted for us to do that with respect to it, because you could factor in the developments that are being proposed today. Braxton is proposing, I think, around 270. I have another developers that may be looking at 400. The property across there, the Two's property, maybe a couple of hundred. And then to the south, they're looking at a couple of hundred more. One thing, if we do overbuild, they could work with DSU for housing. That is desperately needed. So overbuilding for a certain portion, I think, is actually a good thing for our community, because DSU, the students, I don't see how they afford. If you're not on campus, how can you afford a one-bedroom, one-bath at 1,400? You have to have a bunch of people in there. So overbuilding a little bit would be good. That would reduce the property, that would reduce the rents in the area, in the neighborhood. But where we're at, I think we're okay with our projected population, but I can't give you a definitive answer. I think we're fine.
The concern I have, Ed, is just we overbuild to accommodate what's happening today. 5 years down the road, when who knows what's going to happen with this oil thing. But 5 years down the road, let's just say that it moves on and out, and we end up with these apartment complexes that are maybe 50% occupied or even less. The individual who owns those complexes will not be able to afford the upkeep and maintenance. Then what have we done to ourselves here? That's a concern that I have.
I think your question is very valid. Some additional ones that we could do. As a community, we're one of the last bastions, I guess, if you want to use the term, that hasn't lost its identity due to the oil industry, due to the oil impacts. And we're doing our comprehensive plan. We're trying to preserve our quality of life. If we have an overabundance of apartments, I see our city will be a regional attractor. People will come from Williston, come from the other areas, come to Dickinson because we'll have affordable rents. I don't see that if we overbuilt, at least initially, that would be really a detrimental factor, because we would attract a lot of people from the other communities that would come here for affordable housing. Mm-hmm. The other side of it, the flip side, is as the industrial exploration fades away and we look at the service industries, the restaurants, and the commercial that comes afterwards, and that's always a lagging factor from your initial boost, those people, not all of them are going to be able to afford housing, so they're going to have to look for apartments. So that side of it, the service industry, the mid-range ones, our smaller businesses, the majority of probably their employees will be in apartments that today can't afford that. So I think we're fine for the next year or so at our current rate, but that's something that we should keep in mind. So I feel comfortable with it, but I see as long as we preserve our quality of life, we'll be a regional magnet, we'll be an attractor. If we have overabundance of apartments after the expiration phase is done, then that provides us with opportunities as well in different sectors to provide additional economic development. You know, they will be able to find reasonable housing, so smaller businesses will come here because of the quality of life issue. And I think that's what we're trying to do ultimately.
Thank you, Ed.
Any other comments or questions?
Mr. Sullivan, Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Tooze?
do you own the land right north of what would be the Century Apartments, those lots?
Yes, yes, we do own those lots as well. It's about half the block on the east side, and that has already been zoned R3.
Okay.
Mr. Nodland, did you have any comment? Mr. Sullivan, have you been building apartments also in Williston?
Yes, we are in the process of building some 12-plexes up in Williston.
And those 12 plexes up there, are you providing amenities of garages? Or
Yes, yes.
You are?
There's one garage per unit. And
Okay.
I have no objection of doing the same thing down here. That's perfectly feasible.
I concur with Mr. Jackson. I think it would press upon you somehow that they should have some type of inside parking for at least one vehicle per unit. Any other comments or questions for Mr. Sullivan?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Cardon.
Not sure if, was that the next one that we're referring to? There is one part, I need to look at this one. Is this the, nope, I think it's the next petition, my fault. So there's a question on a big piece of property on the south half. I just wanted to mention to you, depending on where the commission goes, that south half is a difficult description to do when you're talking about an irregular shape lot, and that should be a meets and bounds description for clarity purposes.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Jackson.
One more question for Mr. Sullivan. You purchased these lots from the city at least 2 years ago, right?
That's correct.
And I think this is the second or third rezoning request on those lots.
Yes.
Do you intend to build this year?
Yes, absolutely. We just had a couple of financing issues that got worked out just over this last couple months, so we're good to go.
Good.
Any other questions or comments for Mr. Sullivan? Thank you, Mr. Sullivan.
Thank you.
This time I'd ask if there's anyone else in the public who would like to make comment on this, feel free to come forward.
Thank you. My name is Jim Sullivan with Sullivan Construction. I should clarify that we did make adjustments in Williston to include elevators and garages in all those units, and it would be similar what we would do here. If we go 3 levels, they certainly would have elevators for future use if there was a downturn. The 2 stories, we necessarily wouldn't do an elevator, but we would have garages, and that's my mistake. I just provided Austin the information this morning.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to make comment on this rezone request, please feel free to come forward. Any other comments from the commission?
Mr. Chairman, just one, I'm looking at Block 6 there, and that'd be R1 directly adjacent to an R3. Would we want to consider possibly changing that to an R2 or getting some kind of buffer in there?
I think that consideration will be coming up hopefully in a few minutes. I think Lot 6 is going to have a request to go to R2.
Okay.
Yeah. I believe. I hope they follow through with that.
Yes, you're correct.
Any other comments? Okay, we'll close the public portion of this. At this time, I'd ask for a motion.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
I move the City of Dickinson Planning and Zoning Commission recommend approval of the rezone petition from R2 to R3 as depicted in the application materials is meeting all the requirements of Dickinson Municipal Code and also being in the interest of public health, safety, and welfare.
Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
A second by Mr. Krieg. Motion by Mr. Tooze, second by Mr. Krieg. Any further discussion? If none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Recommendation to the city to approve. This time, we have a rezoning request, item 4 on the agenda. It's to consider rezone from R1 to R2 for the property described in Country Oaks Estate, second edition, lots 7 through 11, block 6.
Good morning again. My name's Austin Sullivan from Sullivan Construction, and what we're doing here is just trying to create a buffer from the R3 property to the residential lots to the north.
Okay, could you describe the south half of Lot 1? I'm sorry, I didn't finish that, but the south half of Lot 1 is included in this?
Yes, that is correct. The southern half of Lot 1, it is the way it has been described.
Is that Lot 1 going to be divided east to westerly in proportionately 50% side of a line, or?
Originally, we were thinking of keeping it all as one lot.
Okay.
Okay,
Is it, Mr. Jackson?
Your request today, though, is to rezone the south half, and that's what Mr. Corton was referring to earlier?
Yes.
That we need the meets and bounds.
Yes, we would get you a meets and bounds for that, and just keep it all as one lot at this time.
Do you have any future use, or do you want to leave our Lot 1 north half as R1? Is that the intention, or will it be back
Yes,
there?
the way it was purchased, we don't own the north half of that. It was just, that property line was just extended to the road to the west, so.
All right, thank you, Mr. Sullivan. Any other questions for Mr. Sullivan? Mr. Krieg, does this meet your concerns?
Yes.
Good. Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Sullivan.
Thank you.
This time I'd ask if there's anyone else who would like to make comment on this rezone request. Please feel free to come forward.
Good morning. My name is Nick Shank, and I reside at 2571 10th Avenue East. Now, I'm not objecting to any of the rezoning here. My concern is what is going to happen to 11th Avenue this year. They're building the school to the north of me, and these units to the south of me, are they going to develop 11th Avenue there?
Mr. Corton, do you have any answers on development of 11th Avenue?
Not firsthand knowledge. If the applicant's going to come and build the last, or the current proposal for them, we would require the street that's to the south of it to be built. If they're going to have access off of 11th, then 11th will have to be improved through the existing property itself. I'm not aware of that. I normally am, that's more of a city engineer question on that, but not aware if that's going to be developed in this upcoming year or not. It's part of Bollinger's plans for this development. So.
We'll defer that question to Mr. Soren, the city engineer. He could probably answer your concerns about that, and he'll be right here to help you with that.
Good morning, Sean Soren, city engineer. 11th Avenue West and all the streets in this area, we've been in discussion. There's no plans at this point on the table for development. To the north of this development, we're currently looking at how we're bringing all that together. The developer's talking with the school, working with them on the development of the streets, and I suspect all that's going to be coming in the form of a project for this summer, but currently we don't have that on the table. As far as the Sullivan development area that we've talked about with the R3 and the R2, I haven't seen any plans on that yet, but as part of that development, a requirement would be that water, sewer, streets for their area would be installed for that development to move forward.
Which would probably include 11th Avenue between 23rd and 24th.
Yes, probably we would require from the north property line of theirs south to 23rd. And then Mr. Bullinger would have from their north up to the school property.
Okay.
And I do believe it's going to happen this summer, but we don't actually have plans on the table right now.
Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Soren?
So
Thank
you
you
don't
so
plan on
much.
developing 11th Avenue right now?
Well, we're talking about 11th Avenue right now. I don't have plans on my desk to review for it, but I believe it will happen this summer.
Okay.
As far as the Sullivan development, if they're going to develop that this summer, this portion of it will have to be developed along with that.
Okay, because if this 11th Avenue gets developed, I have some questions. Because my property, unfortunately, is higher than what 11th Avenue would be, so we'd have to put a retaining wall in there.
Okay, we haven't seen any design at this point,
Okay.
so I wouldn't be able to answer that for you
Okay,
right
that's
now.
something for later date.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome, thank you. Any other comments or questions on this rezone request? Anybody from the public would like to make comment? Please feel free to come forward. Anyone on the commission wish to make further comment? Being none, we'll close the public portion of this hearing. At this time, I'd ask for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I'll move that the City of Planning and Zoning Commission recommend approval of rezoning petition from R1 to R2 as depicted in the applicable materials and meeting requirements of Dickinson Municipal Code, also being in the best interest of the public health, safety, and welfare, and to include a meets and bounds description of the south half of Lot 1.
Mr. Chairman, I'll second that.
There's a motion and a second. Motion by Mr. Krieg, second by Mr. Tews, to recommend approval. Is there any discussion? Being none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Recommendation approval. Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. This time we have item 6. It's a preliminary plat. It's to consider a preliminary plat. It's Wesley's second edition for lots 2 through 4, lots 7 through 9, block 3 of the Mayor First subdivision. This time I'd ask the party interested, please come forward and present.
Good morning. I'm Derek Zahn. I'm Chief Financial Officer of Wesley Motor Company. And yes, we have that preliminary plat in front of you that we're proposing to reshape some lot boundaries and a street in order to accommodate our need for housing for our employees. As you are aware, we are in the process now of building a brand-new Western Star dealership adjacent to the property that we're working with here this morning. And it's no news to you, I'm sure, that Dickinson is in desperate need of housing. We're trying to staff our new facility, and we're finding immense difficulties in finding housing for people that we're trying to bring here in order to run our business. We've been working with a service manager that we've been trying to hire, offered him the position. He came to town, tried to find a place to live, and says, I have had no luck. You're going to have to find somebody else because I just can't move to Dickinson because I can't find a place to live. So we felt a need all along that we were going to have to get into the housing business for our employees, and so we're asking for your approval to rezone this property to R3 and to allow us to reshape the lot lines and the access to it so that we could have some apartment buildings to put some people in.
Would it be strictly for your employees, or would you rent to anyone who would like to live there?
Our intention is to provide housing for our employees. If, for whatever reason that we had some vacancies, we would be, looking at the consideration of a possible public rental at some future point. But to start out with, it's only 16 units that we're looking at building, with the potential of another 16 down the road some other time. But we'd be doing 2 8-plexes. They would have garages. That came up earlier here this morning. We were intending to provide a garage for each unit. And we don't feel that 16 apartments is overbuilding, because in our dealership facility, we can easily have 30 employees once we bring that up to speed. So we're crossing our fingers that this would be an appropriate number, and that we'd be able to provide housing for the people that we bring in to work for us that need housing.
Any other questions for Mr. Zahn? I mean, if this was approved or recommended, I don't think we could restrict your rental to people that just work for you. You would be open to renting to anyone. And it's like the company store, you know, they drive a Ford, they work at the Ford plant, and they have to live in a Ford house.
We're not requiring it. We're just providing the opportunity.
So, I mean, just trying to think, we were talking about PUDs earlier. I mean, this is like, they're inside their operation, they want a housing project. I mean, it's a good thing, I think, really, as far as you're looking out for your employees. But if there's a downturn, and then what are we going to do with this apartments, and what are your interests going to be in long term for those apartments?
Well, I guess my answer to that is that, you know, Wesley Motor Company's been in business since 1921. We're very strong, financially speaking. We have deep roots in Minot. We are excited about being in Dickinson, and we want to have deep roots in Dickinson. We've come here to stay. We think that there is a lot of opportunity for us in the long term, or we wouldn't be coming here. We are a heavy truck dealership. We provide the service to those people who are out there drilling, hauling water, hauling oil. And even if the drilling stopped today, for whatever reason, that production is still going to continue, and they still are going to need trucks, and the trucks are going to need service and parts. So we look at this as that we're in this for the long haul. We're going to be a stable employer, and if there is a downturn, we think that we can weather that. And yes, if we had vacancies in those apartments, and we'd be out there competing for renters just like everybody else, but we're big boys and we'll take our chances.
And on the other side, would you look forward to maybe having a need for more apartments?
Well, I wish we had a crystal ball that we could look into that would say, in 3 years, our business is going to be developed to the point where we have that many employees that we would have the need for additional apartment buildings or apartment units. It also depends on what's happening, you know, in the community as a whole, as far as what the availability of housing is. We're a dealership. That's our primary business. We're really not going into the apartments to be a landlord, but we just look at this as being a necessity. We have the property available. It fits into our plan, and so we feel that it's a good business decision.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Zahn.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Zahn, do you have any intention of accessing the property from the east?
Yes. Our plan is to have a private road coming off of the cul-de-sac running down to the parking lot to the dealership in order to allow access between the two properties.
The reason for the question was because of the cul-de-sac and then the continuation on for the road, so I think it's a wonderful plan. I think it's a wonderful use for that property. It's been before us before that this property's been argued and what the intended use of that is, and I think it fits. I think it's a...
that access road came up in the discussion of the civil engineers as they were designing this for us. And my understanding is that because that was going to remain a private road instead of a named street, that the cul-de-sac had to be designed into the plan in order for the public portion of that to allow for turnaround for snow removal and public access. But our intention has always been to have the ability for traffic to move between the two properties.
Mr. Chairman,
Jackson?
Mr. Zahn, just a clarification. I think I heard you say 16 units. The application talks about 4 eightplexes.
Oh, well, our intentions were to build 2 eightplexes immediately. And then as future development, the 2 eightplexes on the north side would be a future development.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Zahn? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This time I'd ask if there's anyone in the public who'd like to make comment on this, please feel free to come forward.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, my name is Brad Fong. I'm the owner of the property adjacent to the south of the proposed rezoning request from GC to RE. My business is Parkway Ford. It's an automobile dealership. I also operate a budget rent-a-car business in the same location. Parkway Ford's been out there for 37 years. On November 16th, last fall, you had a public hearing to replot lots 3 through 5 to build a heavy-duty truck center. I blessed this idea with a good fit to East Dickinson. I also expressed my approval to Mr. Tom Hodgson, the general manager at Wesley Truck Center. 3 years ago, my neighbor to the east, Bill Butler, the Caterpillar dealership, became my neighbor to the east. It's been a great fit. We're real good neighbors. I'm here today to oppose the change on a rezoning request from GC to R3 on lots 2 through 4 and lots 7 through 9 in Block 3 of Mayor's first subdivision. Any form of rezoning from commercial to any form of residential, I'm opposed. Automobile dealerships do not blend well with residential property. Here are my reasons. Safety. Having residents as neighbors coming on my property would create a potential hazard due to vehicle traffic in and around the store. Car lots to the south, heavy-duty truck centers to the east, drainage ditches to the north, and a busy 25th Avenue to the west. None of these make good playgrounds. Costs. I'd have to protect my property with a well-designed fence between the properties. Someone would have to build 623 feet of fence that borders the property. I've talked to a fence builder to build a 6-foot chain link fence at $20 a linear foot. That'd be about $15,000 to put up a good fence. Future plans, I just completed an addition to my dealership to the north. I've paved and put concrete up to the north edge. High-intensity perimeter lighting is next. Then my next expansion plan would be to build an automatic car wash with a commercial blower to dry the vehicles. Automatic car washes can run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. In the past history, my competitors in Dickinson have had issues with residents as neighbors in their downtown locations. Parking, noise, lighting are all valid concerns. Less than 5 years ago, another competitor in Dickinson wanted to build a dealership up on 15th Avenue. You heard testimony from residents opposing the idea. You listened and you denied the request for rezoning change. Today, a real nice church sits in a property that blends real well in the neighborhood. The current use of the owner's property are allowing heavy-duty trucks and equipment to transport gravel and other major equipment across these acres to build their commercial building to the east. This heavy equipment movement doesn't bother me. When the commercial building is completed, I can't believe they should change this property from a truck route to a residential neighborhood. Multiple use just doesn't fit. The solution, I think, here comes in I'm certainly not opposed to building more housing, and this is not the only place in Dickinson where you can build more housing. I'm aware of the need. Just don't build residential housing
east of 25th Avenue, which is well-suited for commercial development. The bottom line is, if you had a vacant lot next to your house, I don't think you'd like me to put a car lot next door and with my excessive lights, my traffic, and my noise. Same thing applies here. I don't think housing next to my car and truck dealership is a good plan. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Fong.
Any questions?
Not at this time, no questions.
I have one. Just
Oh,
want to
Mr. Jackson.
just want to make sure I understand that the property immediately adjacent to the south is where those horses are housed right now, is that correct?
North of me, south of them. You know, I'm on that.
You own the property where those horses are?
No, I do not. No, I do not.
So is that part of the Wesley property?
I believe it is.
Okay.
Okay, thanks for the clarification. This time I'd ask if there's anyone else who'd like to make comment on this, please feel free to come forward.
Morning, Commissioners. Kevin Lamley. I'm the store manager of Butler Machinery. I come before you today to voice opposition for this project. We are against it, the rezoning change from GC to R3. We certainly sympathize with the Wesley people, and I can tell you firsthand, some people are going to say, hey, they're your competition. Our hats go off to them. If you haven't seen, they're building a first-class, world-class facility out there. They're going to be good competition, and the community should be proud of what you see going on out there. But with that said, we can tell you firsthand that there is a housing shortage in Dickinson. We've been here roughly 3 years. We have a full-time recruiter for our Minot store and our Dickinson store to hire just technicians, okay? The number one thing we hear is housing, okay? We need more housing, but we don't need it in commercial areas, okay? As a business there, most of you know when we decided to build our building that in the future, we thought the future would be 8 to 10 years, we were going to expand west, okay? We dusted off the plans to look at the process and starting that and the cost involved. We're going to move closer to this proposed project, okay? In doing so, our concerns are much like Mr. Fong's. I don't think anybody living down there, and we are currently working 24/7, okay? I don't think anybody's going to like a dozer with a backup alarm going off at 3 o'clock in the morning, okay? We're going to be the ones that have to live with those complaints, okay? Lighting's going to be an issue as we expand our lighting that way with apartments there, okay? The third thing is, with apartments are going to probably become children, okay? An equipment company and dozers become a very large playground for kids, okay? Even if the complex has a fence around it, we're going to, because of liability reasons, end up fencing our property just to make sure that we try to keep people like little kids out from the liability standpoint. So even though I understand the need for housing in Dickinson, I just think this is the wrong place to put it, okay? It's right in the middle of commercial property, okay? We're going to work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We're doing most of that right now. So I'd ask you to take that into consideration. And if you have any questions, I'd be glad to take them.
Thank you. Any other comments? Anyone else would like to make comment, please feel free to come forward.
Good morning. My name's Steve Blazing. I'm with Wesley Motors. I just wanted to address a couple of the concerns. We have a similar situation in Minot, and the housing is an issue. And the housing that we have is what we kind of refer to as transitional housing, because the people we want to bring in are family people. They have families. They're thrilled to death to come to an area like this, but they need a little bit of time to find that house. You know, the people we're bringing in aren't concerned about the noise. They're just thankful to be here, to have a good job in a nice area. So what we're trying to provide is what we're calling a nice place. It's going to be first class, gives a chance for a family to come in, and then be able, in 6 to 8 months, purchase a home. And that's the dilemma we also have in Minot. We've done a similar thing in Minot, where we bring people in, good people, good family people, but it takes them 6, 7, 8 months to find that house. And then they're able to purchase a home and be a real contributor to the area. And so the noise won't bother them. And trust me, they're just thankful to live in a nice place like this and have an opportunity. So the noise or the lights won't be an issue. And we're excited about the opportunity. And whatever we need to do to work with our neighbors and you will do. So thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Anyone else like to make a comment on this? Please feel free to come forward.
Mr. Commission, I respect Mr. Blasey. We've done a lot of business together, but we're looking at transition housing here. That's a good short-term fix for a current problem. We're talking about long-term here. These houses and multiple family developments will be up for a long time, and I think there will be a concern for these families to find better homes and so forth, but I don't think we want to put transition housing up for the short term. I think we need to look at the long term, what the effect of the commercial property would be like out there. We need restaurants, we need hotels, we need other commercial businesses. I don't think we need to build a residential neighborhood for transition workers. There's plenty of places in Dickinson now, within a couple miles of our location, where you could build a transitional home.
Thank you, Mr. Paul. Any other comments? Anyone like to make comment, please feel free to come forward. Anyone in the commission wish to make comment on this? I'd ask the question, has anyone had any contact with this type of situation ever? Where you have a company-run housing in the middle of a commercial complex that could make a comment on this, how it's worked?
Mr. Chairman, I think what you're asking for is, what's the longevity, what's the, lifespan of what they're proposing, and this is difficult. I'll grant them that. I go back and forth on it, because we want to protect, the idea of separating zones is predictability and protection for existing developments, and by rezoning it to residential, there will be additional improvements whenever any of the uses to the south decide to do it. There'll be additional buffering and screening requirements. So they may go from a chain link fence if whenever the Ford dealerships decides to put in, let's say, the car wash. They may be required in the future to have an opaque fence and additional screening, which is going to be an additional cost to them that they have not factored in because they've looked at this area as being general commercial. The flip side of it is that, yes, we have a need for residential, and that is true as well. I don't know, maybe a compromise could be that they could redesign their preliminary plat and only rezone maybe for the initial phase, because we're talking more transitional, maybe lots 1 and 2. That would provide and leaves lots 3, 4, and 5 as general commercial. Redesign it so that they would have lots 2 and 3 to be bigger lots, and lots lots 3, 4, and 5 to be smaller, but to be at least several hundred feet deep, so that that transitional layer will be there so that it's not going to adversely impact the commercial uses to the south. They would still be able to provide, still have an R3 zone, but it'll be to the north instead of the entire development. That may be able to, as a compromise, maybe a way to work with their situation. They could provide maybe 2 or 3 eightplexes on those 2 lots. The key is going to be density issues, so they'll have to redesign them to get more acreage. and that may suffice their need. That may be a compromise in order to work with the land uses to the south. I understand their concerns, and they have very valid concerns. As we look at land uses and try to make them compatible with respect to development as we move forward in the next couple of years, we'll probably have more restrictions and more screening requirements to protect the residential from commercial and vice versa. So I don't want anybody to look at it just today and feel, okay, this is all I would need to do, because in the future, whenever they have expansions, they may be required to have more limitations to their development. So I think maybe redesigning it, maybe splitting it down the middle, may be a fair compromise for all. That would protect the interest to the south, the commercial uses, because they would have still that commercial district next to them, abutting it, which is normally how you address screening, landscaping, and compatibility purposes. So they would be protected, and this would also provide enough housing potentially for Wesley's as well. That may be a fair compromise. That might be something you want to entertain as a commission.
Mr. Tews?
Mr. Chairman, when Butler Machinery was built, Mr. Mayor came in here, and I'm assuming that's who Wesley bought the property from. He argued that his argument was that that whole acreage should be residential. If you look at the future land use plan that we have through the city, that land has been designated for residential purposes. Hearing Mr. Fong's concern, all those concerns came to this board with putting a car dealership into an existing residential area. Mr. Fong's car dealership already exists. I believe Wesley knows that it exists and isn't going to come back later and protest with the concerns that those car dealerships in those neighborhoods had, the lighting, the fencing, and those things. If those concerns exist, I think Wesley and Parkway Ford could work out an agreement of who would pay for screening, but there is a rather large drainage ditch that comes down through that property as well that could be used as a buffering area. With all that said, with all the conversations that have been brought to this board over the past 6 years, that property has always been discussed used as a residential property.
Which property?
The Mayor subdivision.
We worked extensively to accommodate Butler for their property and a road vacation, to make it usable for them at the time. And the residential property that was there and to the north, those people did a lot to allow that to happen. Mr. Nodland, did you have a comment or question?
Yes, I do, Mr. Chairman. Actually, I'm a little confused after Mr. Tews's comments. But first, I would just, Mr. Alkin asked a question earlier of all the units that were being proposed today, and are we getting to the point of how many housing units of R3 are we allowing and proposing? And I guess that's my concern is the answer, Mr. Corton says, well, we really don't know, but if we base it on the next 5 years, we're probably, if this continues to grow, we might need those, but we should look at that. Well, now we have a company that's coming in and saying we have a shortage, and we want to provide something for our workers. And the first gentleman said it would be permanent and that it would provide something to the workers we have now and the future employees. But then the next gentleman come up and said it's a transitional type housing that's only for a short time. So who's going to live in these units that we're building to start with? My other issue is, are we setting a precedent? Are we going to have, we have a lot of businesses that are going to want to move to our area. And are we going to set a precedent by allowing them to find some land next to their business that they come in that we already have zone GC, and then we're going to allow them to build something for their employees? I mean, I think we're just we're moving from one area to the next, and I'm just confused about that. I thought this was a general commercial area, and that's what the whole area was set up for. I know up along the interstate that there are some residential area, but the rest of the area along the old Highway 10 is general commercial, and I think there's even some industrial area there. So I just have a problem with it. I agree with Mr. Fong that I think we need to leave it where it is, and if we're looking at approving so many R3s in the next, in maybe today, and we have in the last few meetings, let those places be built and let their employees find their housing just like Butler Machinery employees have had to do. Butler Machinery came in here and they've doubled their size, and they're working 24/7. At one time, they were flying employees from Michigan to here. I mean, I think we provided housing, and I think we're over-providing R3s. That's my personal feeling. I think we need to set back a little bit and watch this grow a little bit and let these buildings get built and look at this. But I have a problem with this, and that's my comment.
Thank you, Mr. Nodland. Any other comments?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Krieg.
I guess I'm on about the same wavelength as Commissioner Nodland there. I guess, our company, we're renting apartments and stuff too, and I think everybody is. I mean, it's kind of a way of what's been happening, and I just would like to reemphasize what both Commissioner Nodland and Alkin have mentioned. I think we really need to get a handle on all the R3s. Every month we come through and we got 1 or 2 or 3 R2s to R3s or R1 to R3s, and I know that doesn't help out with Mr. Curtan's busy schedule, but at some point I think we do need to get a handle on it and see where we're at, because it's been a lot. And, again, back to, just what they said, they're not in the business for apartment rental, and neither are we as a company, and, it's things you got to do for housing, and I guess I would like to probably leave this alone.
Thank you, Mr. Krieg. Any other comments?
Mr. Chairman, the real dilemma is that there's not enough contractors out there to build what is already existing R3 that we already have proposed and rezoned for R3. That's the real dilemma that we're up against. I believe there's probably enough proposed apartment units with what we've already rezoned or proposed, but it's just trying to get them built.
It's true. Thank you. Mr. Corton?
I just thought of an idea that may help you out as part of that, or I'll just muddy up the waters a little bit more, which is fine as well. So let's factor in the idea of, in about 5 years, I think a very conservative figure of maybe 10,000 people coming to the city. Are we going to say with 10,000 that that's going to be all single family? No, no. The ratio will break that up. You will break that up between, whatever ratio that we feel comfortable with single family, and then the rest will be multifamily. So if you just even took 1,000 units, and when you factor in all the potential development that's coming our way with this agenda, you're looking at several hundred. But if you just factored in 1,000 units, by the census figures, I think that you normally have 1.8 per unit, but we could even go by 2.5. That'd still be 200. That'd be 2,500. So that would leave 7,500 left for single family. That's 1,000. That's 1,000 multifamily units. So even that, I think we still, that's 1,000. So I'm looking at, we could probably have not a saturation, but a figure of accommodating them for at least several thousand. If you just did 2,000 at 2.5, then you're looking at, 4,500. So, that you factor in that, and the rest could be single family. I think that's probably a fair ratio. So I feel comfortable that we have not got close to that saturation point based upon where we're going to go in the future. Now, if we, as a city, decided that today we were going to cap development and this is all we're going to do, then we may have, too much multifamily, but we're factoring in the natural dynamics that are happening in the oil industry, the the incredible demand that we have for the next 5 to 10 years, and then that reduction for that. As a city, we're not going to try to meet that demand. We're going to try to figure out what that demand will be up here, and our sustainability level will be here, so we don't have a significant drop of property values when a lot of the temporary people leave. And I think based upon that, we would still be well within a couple of thousand units for multifamily. I mean, I'm just throwing those figures out there for you to consider, so I don't know if that helps you out, but I feel pretty comfortable with that on a general basis.
Thank you, Mr. Corton. Mr. Nodland.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I know I've said this before, and I'm going to get in trouble again, but I think Mr. Corton has to understand where somebody like myself, lived here most of my life, have been through 2 boom and busts in the oil industry. And the city was stuck with about 20-some million of debt in the last boom and bust, and that's only my concern. I'm being ultra-conservative. I'm just concerned that we're not overdoing it, and projections are projections. We just you've hired a university to do some projections for you for the future, and that's hard. I understand that. It's hard for them to even come up with that. I've sat through some of those projections. But I just think we need to kind of we want to accommodate people. We want people to move here. We want our area to grow. But let's just try to have a handle on it and not overdo it to where we cause some future debt issues for our city and our county.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Jackson.
We're trying to push 3 or 4 different conversations forward here right now. I think the question here is a land use question. You've got a map in your packet that makes it clear the amount of commercial, industrial that we have in this area. If you look at the size of the lots, the original platting pretty apparently contemplated commercial. The thing that bothers me most about this is what I learned yesterday from Mr. Corton, that changing this to a residential zoning is going to add restrictions to adjacent commercial property owners. That bothers me. It's going to add restrictions in the way of setbacks. Am I understanding things correctly? You know, I'm not sure that's fair. We all agree on the housing situation, how difficult it is, but I think it can be solved in different ways, and I don't think this is the place to solve it.
No, I agree with Mr. Jackson. I don't think this is a place to solve it, and I do believe that there's a solution. Within our city limits right now, there's room for some 5,000 people, right? Property that could be developed. Am I correct, and has a fairly good estimation?
Well, with the existing lots that we had, yes. I kind of threw some numbers together, and I came up with a projection, and I was dealing with different ratios, about 4,100 or plus, yes. So 5,000 would probably be fair, yeah.
Okay. And I think that market should take care of this problem. That's my opinion. Because we're dealing with land use. And to try to fit a change in land use when there is already property designated for this use that should be available, I think it's not a good thing. And to place the restrictions on adjacent commercial is not real viable either. Any other comments?
Mr. Chairman, I guess I'm wondering if Mr. Zahn or Wesley Motors has talked to, say, Mr. Sullivan or somebody that does build apartments. Have they looked at that route rather than trying to develop themselves?
I think that would be a good suggestion. Any other comments from the commission? Close public portion of this. At this time, I'd ask for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, we have, both the issues have been kind of talked about, the rezoning and the replat, the preliminary plat, so we need to have a motion for the preliminary and also for the rezone. So, 2 separate motions.
Okay. We're going to have ask for a motion first on item 5, a rezoning request. It was a request to rezone from GC to R3, lots 1 through 4. I'd ask for a motion on that.
Mr. Chairman. Oh, go ahead, Jerry.
Go ahead.
Okay, I move the Dickinson Planning and Zoning Commission recommend denial of the rezone petition from GC to R3 as depicted in the application materials, as not meeting the requirements of the Dickinson Municipal Code and being contrary to the interest of the public health, safety, and welfare.
Is there a second to that?
Second.
Mr. Krieg, second. There's a motion by Mr. Elkins and a second by Mr. Krieg to deny. All those in, any further discussion?
Mr. Chairman, I think it's
Mr.
important,
Jackson.
and we've already had one situation today, I think we're going to have another one. I think it's important that we send a message as a community to Wesley's that we do value them here, that this is simply a question of land use and location. That's all this is. And we hope they're successful in everything they do.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Any other discussion? Being none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? One dissent. Mr. Tooze?
Mr. Chairman, could you clarify that? I think it's Mr. Toots with opposition. The
Mr.
rest
Tooze
were in favor.
was in dissent, yes. Motion to deny recommended on the rezone request. At this time, we'll ask for a motion on a preliminary plat, item 6. This was for a replat from, or a plat from lots 2 through 4 and lots 7 through 9. Mr. Colling, do we need to even make a motion on that?
Yes, Mr. President, you will need to have a motion to dispose of the request made by Wesley.
Okay. At this time, I'd ask for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I'll move that the Dickinson Planning and Zoning Commission recommend denial of the preliminary plat for Wesley's second edition as depicted in the applicable materials as not meeting the requirements of the Dickinson Municipal Code and being contrary to the interests of public health, safety, and welfare.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Mr. Elkins. Any discussion? Being none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Recommend denial. Thank you very much. This time we'll go to item 7. It's a final plat for the Cooks Meadow Hill 4th edition of the enclosed property described in the northwest quarter of Section 28, Township 140 North, Range 96 West.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, I'm Harvey Schneider with Tolman Engineering. With me today is Mike Cook, who's the owner-developer for the proposed subdivision. Also with us is Dave Thompson, who's an engineer on our staff, who will answer any questions you may have on the stormwater-related issues. Again, the plat is located in the northwest quarter of Section 28, 140 North, Range 61 West. As previously discussed, the entire remaining property of the Cook Meadow Hills Master Plan is included in this plat. Earlier, I did hand out a copy of the plat as it's being presented today, and then also a proposed zoning map. The Cook Meadow Hills 4th edition as presented has approximately 108 acres in it. The proposed plat's north boundary is the 34th Street West. The south boundary would be the north property line of the Country Oaks 2nd edition replat. The west boundary line is State Avenue North, and the east boundary line would be the west boundary line of the previous Meadow Hills subdivision. The plat will incorporate multiple zoning districts in it, which you can see with the colored map I did hand out. They're going to range from, R1, 2, 3 to community commercial and some limited commercial in the proposed zoning. We understand that the zoning isn't on today's agenda However, we would like to just request a preliminary discussion on the proposed zoning to get the commission's consensus of what we're presenting and prior to our next submittal. Also, the annexation has been requested for the entire plat as submitted, which is, again, the remainder of all of the property Mike Cook owns. The Dickinson Parks and Rec, as we talked about previously, has selected the cash in lieu of the land at this time. There was a letter that we submitted, and they had sent the city and us dated December 13 regarding this matter. We did send out copies of the plat to the local utility companies and have indicated the easements requested on that plat. The way we have it laid out, the plat is, is layered and provides a structural layout, we feel, for the streets with the efficient traffic flow from the east to the west and to the north to the south. The plat, as you see it, and has been submitted and completed, and all the information that's required is in accordance with the City of Dickinson's application requirements. Does the city have any questions, or commission have any questions of Mike or myself on the plat as presented?
Mr. Nodland?
Mr. Chairman, question, you said the Park and Rec had, is what's in blue?
No, the Parks and Rec had written us a letter, and they took the cash in lieu of of the land. Okay.
Gotcha.
I guess what you're seeing in the dark blue on the map is, the dark blue is a limited commercial, and the lighter blue is a community commercial zoning that we're proposing. Okay.
And then, one more question.
Okay.
The red agriculture, is that where the low area where there's sort of a drainage ditch?
Yeah, that's kind of that chartreuse color, yes.
Right.
On that, it'd be on that lot 16 and also lots 5.
Right.
Yep. That'd be the drainage area, and that lot 5 is actually a retention area for the stormwater.
Okay. And is that what, I think an individual had a question about that at a prior meeting?
That is correct, yes.
Yeah, so that's been addressed?
Yes, it has.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Snyder or Mr. Cook?
Mr. Schneider.
Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Chairman, I could just add some comments to that. The rezone application is not part of this today. I'm fine with you discussing that, so you're comfortable with it. It'll be on next meeting. Inadvertently, it was not advertised, and I'll take responsibility for that. We've looked at the rezoning portion of that, and I feel fairly comfortable with that, but I have no problem if you wanted to discuss that after your motion with the final plat on the 4th edition. With respect to the 2 prior conditions that were attached with the preliminary approval, those have been those issues are in the process of being resolved. The development agreement, we are working with the applicant on that, and staff, we would recommend for that to be continued, and we'll have that agreement finalized before going to City Commission. It's been staffed that we still have some issues that we were looking at, but nothing that we would recommend holding up this application with respect to that. And then the drainage issue has been conceptually approved. They've submitted their final drainage plan, and it's being under review as we speak. So the 2 conditions that were part of the preliminary plats, on staff's perspective, have been met. The annexation of that, we're still looking at looking at the property, how it could be annexed. They're in favor of all their property being included within that, and then the city's policy of adding additional property around it so that we don't have islands. So we're in the process of doing that, and that will be, we'll be working with the city commission on that. But staff would recommend approval of the final plat as it's submitted today.
Thank you, Mr. Croton. Mr. Jackson?
Could you give us an idea of what the sequence of development up here is going to be? You know, I see, 3 or 4 single-family homes being built right now, I think. And then
Yeah, I guess that what I'll do is refer that question to Mike Cook, if I could.
Morning, Commissioners. Mr. Jackson, to answer your question on the plat here, we had phases 1, 2, and 3, which were on the east boundary of the property. And as you said, there is a couple of houses that are up and going. That property, all the single-family dwelling lots have been sold and will be permits pulled hopefully within the next few months. The multi-stuff, the R2, which was mostly in Phase 2 or the orange, that property has all been sold. Drawings are all on the boards for all of that property. All the green R3, that has all been sold. Those are definitely drawings all on the boards, should be in with the next few months. And of course, Power Fuels, if anybody's driven up there, they've started, so that project is well off and taking good grounds up there. To continue the rest, our plan is to go in and do the infrastructure for the whole piece coming in. We've got pretty much 80% of it spoken for. So as soon as we can get through the few issues we have here, getting the plat approved, and we can start making some definite meets and bounds descriptions for the sales that will happen. All of the parties have already furnished plans to me, which is one of my requirements. So I pretty much have them all in place and they're ready to go.
make sure I understood you. You said you're essentially going to try to do the infrastructure for the entire development?
Yes. We have already put out bids for the dirt work on the upper portion of Phase 3. Dirt work for the entire site is going to go out on Monday. Sewer and water hopefully within a week after that. And we're putting some pretty stringent deadlines on it.
So what's your intent? Well, it's probably not important. Here's my concern. You know, when we encouraged you to do a preliminary plat for the entire quarter, I didn't anticipate that we were going to get a final plat for the whole thing in one piece. My concern is that the development doesn't take place sequentially, and that we get too spread out with infrastructure and the impact fees and specials that might go with that, and that we end up developing something that has a big gap between it, between already developed ground. Am I making sense?
We don't see any gap in ours whatsoever. South of us, Mr. Bullinger in the Oak Hills or whatever it is.
I'd agree that to date, no problem. I'm just concerned that we're bringing in a big bunch of lots here, and we might take a long time to develop some of that. And I go back to the comments that Mr. Nodland made earlier.
I think it'll take some time to develop, but I think you have the right people. Some of these are pretty big companies that are going to have the means and bounds to get these things developed. So again, 80 to 85% of this is spoken for, and they're ready to go. As soon as we, as a developer, can get the infrastructure, and of course they can't do much without the sewer, the water, the streets, the curb, the gutter, but and that is one of the reasons we're putting a fairly stringent deadline on all the contracts is a lot of these guys would like to be able to get into the ground in the June, July timeframe.
Do you intend to use impact fees?
What's that?
Do you intend to use impact fees on the infrastructure
Yes.
projects?
Yes. We were hopefully going to try and meet with either Ed or Sean after this, just to see where that program is. I mean, I think the intent would be to use it if it's available, but I think a lot of these companies, it probably isn't the end of the world to them. So, I mean, the intent is if it's available, yes, we'd like to, especially for the R1 in the residential area. I think other than that, with the companies that we've been working with, I don't think that is even an issue.
Thank you, Mr. Cook. Any other questions or comments at this time?
Mr. Chairman.
Oh, Mr. Creed.
You did say that all the R1, R2, and R3 have been sold?
Again, about 80% of all the property has been spoken for. Yeah, about 80% of all of them. The R1s, the R2s, the R3 is pretty much done.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cook.
You bet.
Mr. Snyder, did you have anything to add?
Not at this time. I'll just be available to discuss the zoning here once you...
Okay, I think we will deal with the issue at hand first, and then we will let you make comments on zoning, I believe, if we resolve this agenda item. This time, any other comments you'd like to make on the final plat?
No, sir.
Okay. Anyone? That's what this is. This is correct that this is proposed as a final plat. Yes. At this time, I'd ask if there's anyone else who would like to make comment on this, please feel free to come forward. Anyone on the commission wish to make any further comments on this?
Mr. Chairman, I've been through this project, and it's a very nice, Mr. Cook has done a very nice job, I have to admit. The only thing that he failed to do is probably have a Harvey Street. Harvey's been before us, I don't know how many times. But really, it's a worthy project. I think it's a good-looking project.
I wasn't going to bring it up, Mr. Elkin, but I wonder, how does the city sit with us naming streets? Does it add to confusion for rescue and fire and all that if we don't have numbers?
I try to work with numbers, but unfortunately, as development's going faster, you want to have it so that it makes sense. You don't want to put stop at 29th Street, and then you have a big development, and then all of a sudden you label that at 31, and then sequentially as development happens, it doesn't match up. So that came apparent after the second phase of this one here, so I've been okay with allowing it to be named streets. I still need to look at the streets themselves and to confirm that those haven't been used in the rest. There may be a number of street in there if we find it that pattern's done, but it's one of those many issues that I have. I would love to be able to take the time and do a complete grid and be able to say, okay, as you come in, your street's going to be called this and that, but it's not high on my priority list. So I prefer to have number streets. It makes sense. We'll get to that point, but in the meantime, having named streets are fine. It doesn't affect the EMS or service for that. Within a development itself, even if we had all the numbers and it all worked out well, I think granting a developer at least one named street makes sense. This one here, we've allowed more, but the sequencing pattern just didn't work out well, so I'm okay with allowing the streets to be as they are.
Thank you, Mr. Corton.
Mr. Chairman, I just encourage you to leave them off the plat. Go ahead and name them names if you want, but once you put it on the plat,
It's there.
you're tied into it. There's more important things, I guess.
with respect to that, Mr. Jackson, we had that philosophical issue, which the other surveyor said that you needed to have it on there, so I'm open to suggestions. I'm okay with it just being called the road, but...
Thank you. Any other comments? At this time, we'll close the public portion of this and ask for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, could I just discuss one more
Yeah.
thing
Oh, yeah.
before we do this?
Yes.
I'm concerned about bringing the whole thing in at one time. And I'd like to hear from Mr. Curtin a little bit, and maybe Mr. Soren about this, but my concern is that we jump up to, just use an example, Block 4, if you look at the colored diagram, that we jump up to Block 4, Block 6, because there's a good buyer and somebody who wants to develop that fast, and we've got a bunch of ground in between. This is what got us in trouble. This is one of the things that got us in trouble 30 years ago. And I realize it restricts the developer more, but I wish we could see a more sequential development starting from where we are now and moving out. But I'm open to hearing what our staff says about that.
I could comment with that, Mr. Jackson, and then if Mr. Soren wants to walk up here as well, he's more than welcome to do so if he's still here. If not, then that's fine. What I have done in the past for that is that to ensure that, if there's a system, if they're developing way on the fringe, that all the infrastructure and the amenities, if there are any, are all established so that so if it does fall through, that you're not creating an island and you're going to have problems with that. If you're going to have it all on a far side, then they're going to have a street pattern, they're going to have to pave those roads or provide a performance bond in order to get that, the development in the middle so that we have that assurance. It's kind of left up to the city engineer to decide, is it going to be a problem with the way that if they piecemeal it instead of doing it in a consistent basis. And if it is going to be piecemealed, and if he feels that there could be a lack of it, let's say sewer or water, or maybe even the streets, then we could require a performance bond to ensure that that remaining portion will be developed. And that would be my recommendation for that.
My concern is more if they are developed, and we spent 25 years plowing streets, plowing snow off of streets that there were no homes on, and taking care of water and sewer. And I know there's no intention for that to happen today, but we don't know what the future is going to bring.
And that's always a liability, unless you come in and say you're going to develop it this way, and you're going to have that whole block developed, and before you could do anything more. And that's not our traditional pattern. We haven't done that in the past, and jurisdictions don't do that. And that's always a potential liability, that when the infrastructure is placed in there, it's dedicated over to the city assumes responsibility, that if you don't have the development that comes after the fact, the houses don't come in with the property taxes to ensure that that infrastructure is paid for, and otherwise the city, yes, could be on the hook, but that's always there. And I don't have a perfect remedy other than saying you have to do one block at a time and make sure all the houses are done.
That's pretty tough to do when you have a development or a project of this size and magnitude, though, is it
Yes,
not?
it is. Yes, it
Because
is.
of our transition from R1, R2, R3 into whatever general commercial or what have you, that's pretty tough to phase that in that way then, is it not, Gene?
I think it can be done. I do. I'm not suggesting it be one block at a time. Maybe this plat we're looking at today is 3 pieces or something. You need to look at how the sanitary sewer is going to progress and some of those kinds of things to see how you would do that. There will be some challenges with that.
Mr.
But
Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Tooze.
Mr. Jackson, I disagree a little bit because this has been before us for 3 years. Harvey has done a pretty extensive overlay of the whole area. He has come across the north existence of his property and developed that. I think if we limit him on how far he can go, it will kind of stop some operations of how he puts his infrastructure in. I think by letting him do this last plot and this last acreage opens up the door for him to properly plan and put that infrastructure in as needed. And he's got like 5 or 6 roads here to do. It's gonna make it more conducive for his dirt crews, more conducive for his water and sewer crews. He's done a fine job. And I think if we limit him, we're limiting the job and his capability of what he can do. So I don't think we should limit him. He's brought it in multi-phases, so, and he's done fine.
Any other comments? We've reopened comments. I agree with Mr. Jackson, because I've made the comment over the years about all the empty lots in Dickinson, and we plow by them, we drive our garbage trucks right by them. It costs us to go by these empty lots, and there's hundreds of them, lots of them, down empty streets and one house at the end, or 3 lots in between. But they've done a nice job on this development and the progression. And I hope that the engineering department has a handle on this and saying, hey, you know, this is the way the infrastructure is going to tie into city water, sewer, and whatever, that it's going to progress at the rate and where we want it to go without tying the hands of the developer. We are caught in a certain position where, yeah, there could be a downside to this. But I don't, you know, it's not, it's just, how can you make it 100%? Any other comments on that? Mr. Jackson's thoughts on this?
You know, we've been told that the R1 lots in the first phase have been sold, but we don't know when they're going to be developed. And that can happen all the way through this, or any development. It's not just this one. And absolutely, this is a well-done plat. I've said that before as well.
And I know, going back to my very first comments on this, before there was even a scratching made on the ground, I made the comment about the property bordering 34th on the north. I came around and said, are you going to skip over everything else? Just, if you can, go to 34th and develop all that, and what's going to happen in between? And that was several years ago. So, you know, there is some risk.
Mr. Chairman, my other comment on that is, we're asking Mr. Cook to annex the whole piece in and asking him to be a player of the city, but yet we're telling him, nah, we just want you to plot a portion. That doesn't make sense to me. Either it's all in or it's all out. So if we're asking him to annex all of it, we should be plotting all of it. Not, okay, you can annex part of it in, but we only want you to plot 10 acres, 20 acres. Doesn't make any sense. Either we're going to do it, or let's take half of it.
Any other comments? Being none, we'll close the public portion of this, and I'll ask for a motion.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Tews.
I make a motion that the City of Dickinson Planning and Zoning Commission recommend the final plot approval of Cook's Meadow Hills, 4th edition, as depicted in the application materials, is meeting all the requirements of Dickinson Municipal Code, and also being in the interest of public health and safety and welfare.
Thank you. There's been a motion to recommend approval of the final plat. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
There's a second. Any discussion?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Jackson.
If you don't mind.
No.
I'd like to hear Mr. Schneider or Mr. Cook just talk about the phasing, how we can keep control of this. I think you understand my concerns.
Yes, go ahead. Yeah. Please.
I agree with Tracy. Tracy's been in the business a little bit too, so he obviously knows what he's talking about. But I think, Mr. Jackson, one of the things you would really be doing by doing that is hindering the growth of what you people need. And, Tracy is right. If you're going to come in, first off, we were asked to do this, and that's why we did it. We conformed and tried to work very well with Ed and Sean, and that's what they asked us to do, so that's what we did. If I wouldn't have had so many contracts sitting on the table, I wouldn't be doing this. But what we found with the first 1, 2, and 3 phases was before we got through the planning and zoning in commissions, it was sold and everybody wanted more pieces. So then we had to work the 3-4 months to get that done. And by the time we got that done, it was sold and everybody wanted more. So again, I am very proud of this development for the city of Dickinson, and I appreciate all the comments, and I think Harvey and his staff did a heck of a job with designing. And I've been watching and making every contractor or developer furnish prints to me so I can approve them. I just want this to be something nice for you guys. And believe me, with all of the companies that have sent me the stuff, I think you're going to see some pretty decent stuff out there. And they all want to go now. They just want to go now. So I could go down and open up the single family and probably lose 3 or 4 contracts. And that doesn't bother me. I think in time they would sell, but it's just a matter of you're looking for housing, you're looking for apartments, and we can give it to you. And I think we have it under control. I think Harvey's worked pretty well with Ed and Sean on the sewer system. We've got it under control.
Thank you, Mr. Cook. Did that shed any light on how they're going to work through the phases, how this is going to...
No.
No. We'd like to see a lot-by-lot play. No. Thank you. Any further discussion? No. This time, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
One dissent. Mr. Jackson. Recommend final plat. This time, we'll take a few minutes of comment. At this time, we'll take a 5-minute recess, and after that, we'll do a few minutes of comment on rezone, and we'll go to sketch plats. Okay. Mr. Schneider, allow you to make comments on some rezoning proposal you're going to come up with, and so we can be kind of heads up on this.
Okay, again, I passed out a sheet earlier. It's the colored sheet indicating the proposed zoning that Mike would like to see on his particular property. And, we've been all the way through the whole process here. We've kind of been handing these colored sheets out showing the proposed zoning, and some of it has changed and a little bit here and there, but this is, I guess, what the contact Mike has had with the potential builders and such out here. This is the proposal that he would like to submit to the city. And I know there's been some discussion along 34th Street on the north in regards to, originally we had it shown as all CC or community commercial property. And I guess with meetings with the city, Sean and Ed, we've eliminated that middle portion in between Kelvin Avenue and 12th Avenue, and we put that as an LC zoning on that particular area. And then we also, the commercial is still wrapped around onto the State Street with the corner lot being CC and the next lot to the south being CC. And then the following lot with the LC. I'll just run through these roughly. On the single family with the R1, we're looking at approximately 56 lots. With the medium density, the R2, we're looking at, this is only on what we're bringing in on this plot. We're looking at 39 lots. With the proposed R3, we're looking at the 4 lots, which are, you can see, they're rather large. And with the community commercial, we're looking at a total of 8 lots. With the limited commercial, we'd be looking at the 7. And then we have the 1 lot, there's an existing oil well down there. We have it labeled as, it can either be the industrial or the agricultural, and I guess we can discuss how we want that zoned. And then there's an additional 2 lots on the southwest corner, which would be the drainage way in the detention pond area, where we were looking at just leaving that agricultural. But I guess in a nutshell, that's kind of the layout that we're proposing, and I just wanted to get the, commission's consensus on this, because there was some discussion previously, and before we make the final proposal to the city or submittal the application, I just wanted to know if there's any discussion or what the commission's thoughts are on what we're proposing. The one thing with the limited commercial, when we were talking about changing that from the CC, we just liked, I guess, the way that blends in. It really, it services, or it's got a low impact on the commercial side, and it has facilities that will be built that will, service the residential area in the neighborhood.
Anyone have any comments for Mr. Cook on these proposals that we'll probably see in the future?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Tooze?
Lot 6, that you have general industrial, we know it's an oil well.
Yeah.
What we required a group that came in here last month to do is to zone it as the property around. We didn't do that with Roars? Yes, we did.
Yes, we did. With Roars, they wanted to have that development expectation. It doesn't have to be industrial. If that was the reason that you wanted that zoning for industrial to be that way, it doesn't have to be. It would make sense to just leave it as residential. I guess the question would be on that one, Harvey, would be, is the oil company going to own that lot? You broke it out, and the rest, I presume they're going to be the property owner when this is all finalized. Is that correct?
I guess I haven't had communications with the oil company as far as the ownership. Have you, Mike?
We've had our attorney working with them, and I guess it's a question, what we would like is for them to, just for the liability end of it. So the attorneys between Mr. Klein and myself are working on how we're going to handle that.
Chairman, that's,
Mr. Jackson?
I think a fairly significant question, and I don't know how much control the city will have over that. If the developer can't make an agreement with the oil company, the developer will end up with the ownership, and we'll have to pay taxes, whatever they may be, on that property, and I see that as being a potential future problem for the city, but I don't know what we can do about it.
The oil company has a surface lease for using that property, or they own the property? Okay. And I asked about the Roar property, do they have the ability to go in there and put another well into a different formation if they want to? Do they have that right?
I can't answer that.
I guess I can't answer that one on this particular piece. I'm just trying to think if we really read that anywhere in there. I don't think this particular group does on this piece. I think they had the one well, and then, of course, through our planning, we gave them that corridor to put that pipeline, and I think he's about done there now. And I think Mr. Klein, from what I can tell in the letters I've gotten so far, is pretty susceptible to taking that lot, so.
Thank you. Any other comments on
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Jackson?
I think the discussion we really need to have, and it's good that Mr. Cook and Mr. Schneider bring it to us today, is the discussion along 34th or 40th. We're going to create some precedent here. You know, I think we have to look at 40th, that what happens on the south side is likely to happen on the north side from a land use standpoint. This is a half mile of the road. If we look at the half mile to the east, you know, I suspect we'll get a request for commercial. We'll go to the west, and I would expect some of the same thing. So I wonder, pretty soon, are we going to have the entire 2 miles and then the 2 miles south to the interstate all be commercial? I think it makes a lot of sense to have commercial pods, or whatever you want to call them, around the major intersections. That makes a lot of sense, I think. 10th Avenue West, State Avenue, and on down the line. I'm not sure it makes sense to have commercial for 4 miles. I guess that wouldn't appeal to me. So, you know, when we look at this commercial, it probably looks pretty reasonable. But if we look big picture, I'm not sure it is. I'm not sure that the dark blue along 40th, 34th shouldn't be some kind of multiple housing as opposed to the commercial.
Okay, and that commercial property is approximately 250 feet in depth from the south point of the right-of-way?
I believe so, yes.
Those lots are 250 feet deep? I think that's from the south edge of...
No, that's from we dedicated the right-of-way there we dedicated 75 feet from the center line to the right-of-way line. The lots are 250 foot in depth, you know, to the next street, yes. You know, and one other consideration along there was that, you know, there's a major power line or an overhead line that runs, you know, on the south right-of-way line there that comes into, you know, the property. They do have an easement in there. I guess, you know, to follow up with some of Gene's conversation is that, you know, we did meet with, you know, Sean and Ed, and maybe Ed can elaborate a little bit on the LC. You know, with that LC zoning, we could still be allowed with a special use to bring in an apartment complex or residential. And that's one of the things I think was Mr. Jackson's concerns with the residential. But maybe Ed could elaborate a little more on our discussion we had when we were talking about the zoning.
Mr. Cortana.
Yes, I could add to that, Mr. Chairman. That is true. The LC does allow multifamily housing, so it's, in essence, it can be kind of a mixed-use zone with a special use permit. So based upon, you know, comments from Mr. Jackson, that may very well be the case, and probably will. You know, with the demand that we have, somebody will probably purchase the land and come in with a special use permit for that. And then it's up to, you know, the site design and how you look at the project to determine if you feel comfortable with that, or it's going to be office related. We're talking medical, you know, medical, dental, where it's all contained within the building itself. You don't have outside display. That's our least intensive commercial district. With respect to Commissioner Jackson's comments about going west on State off of 34th, our future land use destination, essentially State is going to stop where we would probably see commercial going further west on 34th. Going further west would be designated as residential. So, you know, that makes sense because you would have a corridor of roughly about a mile up to Highway 22. That can be commercial along that as a development on 34th, but further to the west, that would make more sense to have it more residential in nature. So there is a natural demarcation line of State Avenue. Right there at State Avenue, across the way, it would make sense to maybe have a little commercial node there, but beyond that, the properties to the west would make sense to be as residential. So
I think we would have our natural block with our future land use destination.
And this takes up approximately a half a mile, right?
That is correct, yes.
Any other comments or questions for Mr.?
You know, when I look at
Snyder?
this, I would rather see, first of all, if we zone something, whatever designation it is, I think we've got to assume that's what it's going to be. Yes, it may be something else, but I think we've got to assume that if it's commercial, it's going to be commercial. I would rather see, if you look at Block 4, for instance, I'd rather see a little bit more of that be zoned commercial and less of it on 34th to break up that commercial more. Now, it's probably too late where Powers is building on the east side. It's probably too late to do, but I could see a little bit of commercial there. In other words, bunch it, group it at the intersections. Again, you know, I don't think, I can't imagine this board turning down requests at the intersection of State Avenue and 34th for commercial in all 4 quadrants. I can't imagine we'd turn that down, whether it would take a map amendment in our land use map or whatever it would be.
Would be an ideal place for it.
We're going to face this on this street, we'll face it on Highway 22. There are going to be a lot of other places we'll face this.
Yeah, I think that's valid. I mean, I think those are good thoughts. I mean, that's the intersection of States and 34th. But like you say, once it's rezoned to something, that's it. It is going to be that unless someone comes in to request it to change again, and we made the commitment. But those are thoughts I think you should carry with you then.
Okay.
That.
Well, the one thing Mike's trying to do here is preserve the quality of the subdivision. He's requiring all the contractors and the proposed developers for these sites to turn in plans where he personally has to review everything prior to them even coming to the city for, you know, get a permit to do it, so. Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Snyder.
I would like to add one thing, Mr. Jackson. You were talking about some commercial coming down on State Street into the Lot 4, I think it is. The group that has given a letter of intent on that actually kind of has a neat concept, and one of the requirements with that is that we get the commercial zoning for it, and what they've done is they have a gas station, convenience store, car wash thing tied in with their housing development, and it was kind of interesting. It looked pretty good. So they would need that zoning to do that on that particular site that they want there.
And which is that site?
It would be down the block from, let me get my glasses on so I can see. It would be the block 4 on the far left-hand against States, where part of it's blue, part of it's green. So the green part, the R3, is where they were going to do their housing project, and as you come out of that, again, they had a convenience store, gas station, car wash, all tied in with it, and again, it was pretty nice looking.
Sure, and I think that's a great concept. You know, I suggested that perhaps even more of Block 4 could be commercial. So.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cook. Okay. Anyone else want to comment at this time on this rezoning we're going to end up seeing? Not, we'll move on. We have item 8, a sketch plat. It's a S&B subdivision situated in the northeast quarter of Section 32, Township 140 North, Range 96 West. This time I'd ask the party presenting this, please come forward.
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, my name is Will Ralph, and I'm with Sanderson Stewart, and I represent Braxton Development and the Sterling Group on on this project. I'll just give you kind of a quick run-through of the project. This is a two-lot minor plat on the corner of 21st Street West and State Avenue North. It's on the southwest corner of the development. There's a 16-acre tract, which is shown here is Lot 2, and a full, which was previously zoned R3 at a meeting last month. And then we have Lot 1 here, which would be about 4 acres that'll be coming forward soon with a zone change application for commercial zoning, community commercial type zoning. The planned land use for this project is to build apartment complexes in here. There'd be about 278 apartment buildings within that R3 zoning. The water and sewer within the site would be privately owned and maintained by the owners of the property. The owners would keep these units as rental units, and they'd be a mixture of 1, 2, and 3-bedroom units, 3-story buildings. As I mentioned, we're going through a concurrent zone change process. Last week, we were approved by the commission for the zoning on this property, and we have submitted an annexation application as well that's will likely be coming forward here in the next month or so. So with that, I'd entertain any questions that the commission might have regarding the sketch plat.
You said you're having different size units there. Do you have a breakdown yet of how many of each you think you're going to put in?
I can pull up my. This is kind of a general layout here. Oops, let me turn up the right side here. Yeah, I think we're approximately about 60% one-bedroom units with 20% 2-bedroom and 20% 3-bedroom approximately. And there would be mixture of units throughout the site. The intended development here is to be a fairly high-end apartment facility, higher rent. There will be amenities for the residents on site. As you can see here, there's a clubhouse that will provide exercise rooms and activities and stuff for the residents. There'll also be a car maintenance and car wash center up here in the corner. So the residents can have those uses as well. So it'll be a good mixture of units. There will be garages for each unit, in addition to some parking for visitors and other things. It is a nice development. The Braxton Group, along with the Sterling Development Group, have developments of this type all over the nation. They own and operate several thousand units in developments of this nature. So.
Anyone else have questions or comments?
Mr. Chairman, I could provide comments with respect to this development based upon discussions I've had with the city engineer. We're all very aware that this area is probably the prime land, that's left within the city, and the city is very cognizant of that. We want to preserve it. We want to do it right. And we're going to require the Braxton Group to work with the developer across the street and also the developer to the south, 20 acres to the south of them, to come up with a coordinated road alignment plan for that area. We have not definitively determined where those roads should be, and the development across the street, those roads